The cardboard box hit the gravel before Lyra did. She had been carrying it with both arms, walking fast the way she always walked when she wanted to outrun her own thoughts, and she misjudged the last step off the bus. The box went down. The bus doors closed. The bus left. She stood on the side of a country road in the late afternoon with her whole life scattered across the gravel. A chipped mug, 3 paperback books, a folded blanket the color of old mustard, and a zipper pouch that held everything she trusted enough to keep close. She picked it all up without hurrying. There was no point hurrying. The next bus would not come until morning. She had already known that when she boarded. The Dalver estate was 3 kilometers up the road according to the directions she had printed, and folded into her coat pocket. She had printed them at the library 2 towns back because her phone had died on the train and she had not had a chance to charge it. She was used to making do. Making do was, at this point, a personality trait. The road was lined with old trees, the kind that had been growing long enough to stop caring what the weather thought of them. Their roots pushed up through the asphalt in places, slow and patient. Lyra walked between them with her box resealed and tucked under one arm, her coat buttoned against the October wind, and her eyes straight ahead. The estate gate appeared after about 20 minutes, iron, tall, not locked, which she had not expected. She pushed it open and walked in. The house was the kind of building that had once been impressive and had since decided it did not need to try. Stone walls, several chimneys, windows that caught the last of the light and held it in a way that made the whole facade look like it was thinking. There was a car parked to the left, expensive and dark and very clean. There was no one on the path. She knocked on the front door because there was no bell she could find. The man who answered was not who she expected. She had expected someone her own age, maybe, or someone harried and distracted. She had not expected a man who looked to be somewhere in his late 50s, with silver hair combed flat, a posture that suggested he had never once slumped in a chair, and an expression of mild, professional appraisal that made her feel briefly like she was being reviewed for a position she had not realized she was still interviewing for. "Miss Voss," he said, not a question. "Yes," she said. He stepped back and she walked in. His name was Mr. Aldred. He was the head of household staff, which apparently meant he was the person who had answered her email, arranged her contract, and would now be showing her everything she needed to know about the estate. He did all of this with the calm efficiency of someone who had explained the same things many times and had made peace with explaining them again. The house was larger inside than it looked from the front, hallways that turned where she did not expect them to, ceilings high enough to make sound behave differently, footsteps getting quieter rather than louder, voices dropping naturally rather than echoing. She noticed that everything was clean, not recently cleaned, but genuinely, structurally clean, the way some places were when someone paid close attention to them every day for a long time. Mr. Aldred showed her the kitchen, which was modern in a way that surprised her, fitted with appliances that were efficient and quiet and looked like they had been chosen by someone who actually used them. He showed her the utility room, the cleaning supply closet, the schedule posted on the back of the pantry door. He showed her the formal rooms on the ground floor, the sitting room, the library, a dining room with a table long enough to seat 20, and then the private areas where she would be working most days, the smaller family rooms, the offices, the corridors between. He did not show her the 3rd floor. She noticed that. She noticed the way the staircase went up past the 2nd floor landing and continued, and the way Mr. Aldred stopped at the 2nd floor landing without pausing, as though the stairs simply ended there, as though the continuation was not worth mentioning. She did not mention it either. There would be a reason, and she would find out the reason in her own time. There was always a reason for the things people did not mention. Her room was in the east wing, reached through a door off the 2nd floor corridor that felt slightly separate from the rest of the house, warmer in temperature, quieter in sound, as though the wing had its own atmosphere. The room itself was small but decent. A single bed with a white duvet, a wooden dresser with a mirror above it, a window that looked out over a side garden that had gone over to autumn, but still had the good bones of something someone had once cared about. There was a small radiator under the window. It worked. She tested it immediately. She set her box on the bed and did not look at it. Looking at it too long made her count the things inside it, and counting the things inside it made her think about what was not inside it, and thinking about what was not inside it was not something she could afford right now. She had a job. She had a room. She had a place to be for the next however many months until she figured out the next thing. That was enough. Mr. Aldred knocked on her open door and handed her a sheet of paper, the schedule for the coming week, printed cleanly, with her specific duties marked in a slightly different font. He also handed her a folded card with the house's internal phone number and an instruction to call him if she needed anything in the first few days. He said this the way people said things when they meant it, which she appreciated. After he left, she changed out of her travel clothes and washed her face in the small bathroom attached to her room. The hot water came immediately. She stood for a moment with her hands under the tap, letting the warmth move up her wrists. She had taken the job because she needed money and a roof, and something to do that was far enough away from everything else, that the everything else could not follow her here easily. That was the real reason, the one she had not written in her application letter. In the application letter she had said she had a year of housekeeping experience and excellent attention to detail, and was available to begin immediately. All of that was also true. The two things were not mutually exclusive. You could need a job for the obvious reasons and also for the less obvious ones. She had learned that people usually did. She met the other members of staff at dinner, taken in a small room off the kitchen with a round table and a window that was starting to go dark by the time she sat down. There were 4 of them besides Mr. Aldred and herself. Wren, who was around her age and sat beside her, and passed the bread without being asked, which was the fastest way to make Lyra decide she liked someone. Owen, who handled the grounds and came in for meals with soil still under his fingernails, and did not apologize for it. 2 others. A woman called June who handled the formal rooms and said almost nothing, and a young man called Pip who did general tasks and seemed to find everything mildly entertaining. None of them mentioned the person whose house this was. It was not an unfriendly silence around that subject. It was more like a shared, unconscious agreement not to bring something up at dinner, the way a group of people might not mention a loud noise they all heard but had agreed was not worth discussing yet. Lyra ate. She listened. She did not ask. After dinner, she found her way back to her room, and sat on the edge of her bed, and opened her box properly for the first time since packing it. She put the mug on the dresser. She stacked the books on the windowsill. She folded the blanket over the foot of the bed. She set the zipper pouch on the bedside table where she could see it. Then she lay back and looked at the ceiling and thought about nothing in particular, until her eyes got heavy. She was good at that, at making the inside of her head go quiet when it needed to. She had learned it the hard way over several years of situations that had required it. She could not always make the feelings go away, but she could move them to the back, like furniture she was not using, still there, but not in the center of the room. The radiator ticked steadily. The window showed a piece of sky that had gone fully dark. Somewhere outside, something moved in the garden. She heard it briefly and then it was gone. She closed her eyes. She was asleep before she finished the thought she had started. The first 3 days of work were the kind of straightforward that she trusted more than anything. There was a rhythm to the house that was easy to learn. What needed attention every morning, what could wait until afternoon, which rooms collected dust faster, which windows faced the direction that made them streak after rain. She moved through the schedule efficiently and without needing to be shown anything twice. Mr. Aldred noticed. He did not say so, but she could tell by the way his expression shifted. Not to warmth exactly, but to a kind of settled recognition. The way someone's face changed when they realized they were not going to have a problem. Wren worked alongside her on most mornings, and by the second day they had settled into a comfortable working quiet that occasionally broke into conversation, and then went back to quiet without anyone forcing either state. Wren was from a small town about an hour south. She had been at the estate for 8 months. She knew where everything was, and she knew which parts of Mr. Aldred's schedule were flexible and which were not. And she shared this information freely and without drama, which was exactly the kind of colleague Lyra needed. She showed her which cleaning products were in the supply room but not on the official list, the ones that actually worked on the old stone floors. She showed her which window handles stuck and needed to be lifted before turning. She showed her where the good tea was kept, not in the staff kitchen cupboard where the standard boxes lived, but in a tin on the second shelf of the pantry that Mr. Aldred pretended not to know about. Lyra made a note of all of it. On the 3rd morning, she was cleaning the library when she looked up and read the name on the spine of a book that had been placed face out on the desk, not shelved but left out, like something recently set down. The name on the cover was Cade Dalvar. It was a book about land management, dense and practical, the kind of thing you would not read for pleasure. There was a bookmark sticking out near the back. So the house did belong to someone who was actually in it. She put the thought away and went on cleaning. On the 4th morning, she found the schedule had been updated. Her name was written in Mr. Aldred's careful handwriting in a new column, the East Wing Private Corridor, every morning, beginning that day. She had not been assigned that corridor before. It did not alarm her. It was just a corridor. She started at one end with her supplies and worked toward the other. The doors along it were all closed. She dusted the wall fixtures and the floor runner and the window at the far end that looked out over the back garden. She was nearly done when she realized the last door on the left, the one closest to the main house staircase, was slightly open. She did not mean to look. She was reaching for the dust cloth she had left on the floor, and she glanced up, and the angle was such that she saw, briefly, the edge of a desk, books along one wall, a lamp that was on even in the morning light, and the back of a chair that was facing away from the door. The chair was occupied. She picked up her dust cloth and moved to the window, and finished that section of the corridor and left. She did not look again. She was not the kind of person who looked again. But she thought, for the rest of the morning, about the lamp being on, about someone sitting in that chair at that hour with a lamp on and the door open a crack, in a house full of people who all moved carefully around them without naming why. She thought about the bookmark near the back of the land management book. She thought about a person who let the door sit open by accident and was probably not aware that it was open, probably somewhere entirely inside their own head, the way people got when they had been alone with something long enough. She folded that thought and put it away with the others. By the time she was back in the kitchen washing her hands before the lunch prep began, she had decided that none of it was her business and she intended to keep it that way. The decision lasted for approximately 4 days, which was about what she had expected. The thing that interrupted it was not dramatic. She had stopped expecting drama to arrive in dramatic ways. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a folded piece of paper that had been slipped under her bedroom door at some point during the morning, and which she found when she came back to her room after finishing her afternoon assignments. She unfolded it. It was a second supplementary version of the house rules. The main rules she had already been given at the start. The schedule, the areas of responsibility, the emergency contacts. This was something different. It was handwritten, in a script that was not Mr. Aldred's. It listed things in plain, brief language. Staff are not to enter the 3rd floor without prior arrangement. The main study is to be cleaned only on Wednesdays, between 10 and 12, when the room will be unoccupied. The garden east of the stone wall is used for private exercise. It is not to be entered or observed between 5 and 7 in the morning. There were a few more items in the same style, quiet and direct, not explaining themselves, only telling you what the rule was and leaving the reason to your own understanding. She read it twice. She set it on her bedside table next to the zipper pouch. She looked at it for a moment. Then she turned off the light and went to sleep. That night she lay awake for exactly 20 minutes thinking about the 3rd floor. Not because she was planning anything, because she was the kind of person who noticed the door that was not supposed to be opened, and noticing was already the first step toward something, even if you did not intend it to be. She turned over. She closed her eyes. She thought about nothing. She was asleep in 4 minutes. On Friday she had a conversation with Ren that she had not planned but that she had perhaps been working toward since she arrived. They were folding linens together in the utility room, standing on opposite sides of the big sorting table, and Ren was talking about a town she had visited the previous weekend, and then she stopped talking about that and there was a brief silence, and then Lyra said, not quite casually, that she had found the supplementary rules. Ren did not look up from the sheet she was folding. He leaves those for new staff, she said. It's his way of explaining things without explaining them. Whose way? Lyra said. Not a question. She already knew, but she needed Ren to say it. Ren said the name quietly, as though it were a weather report rather than a person. Mr. Dalver. She set a folded sheet aside. She reached for another, and then, still not looking up, she told Lyra something she had clearly decided to tell her, which was that Cade Dalver ran the estate and had been doing so alone for a while now. That there had been someone with him before and that person was gone. That he was private and preferred things to be handled indirectly and had not, in the 8 months Ren had been here, once eaten a meal in the staff room, or made conversation that went beyond what was necessary. Is he difficult? Lyra said. Ren thought about it. No, she said. He's not difficult. He's just very contained. Lyra picked up the next sheet and shook it flat and began to fold. Contained, she said. Yes, said Ren. Neither of them said anything else about it. Lyra drove the word around in her head for the rest of the afternoon, the way you rolled something in your hand when you were trying to feel what it actually was. Contained. It was the word you chose when you could not say closed off without it sounding like a problem, when you could not say guarded without it sounding like a judgment. Contained was a word that suggested choice, structure, a person who had decided to be a particular way and had managed it successfully. She had met contained people before. She recognized the shape of them. She was also, if she was being fair, a bit contained herself. She reached the end of the afternoon with her assignments done and her room tidy and her thoughts arranged into their proper compartments, and she sat by her window and watched the last light leave the garden and thought, not for the first time, that she had found a good place. Strange, yes, quiet in ways that asked questions, but good. She could work with good. She would. The note under her door on Saturday morning said nothing about third floors or restricted gardens. It was from Pip, who had drawn a small map of where he had discovered a broken drawer handle in the third guest bedroom, and had added a smiley face beside it that she found oddly charming. She fixed the drawer handle before lunch. Pip said thank you. She said it was nothing. It was not nothing. It was a perfectly competent drawer handle repair, but saying it was nothing was the thing you said. By the end of her first week, Lyra Voss had learned the shape of the house, and the shape of the staff, and the edges of a life she was going to be living here for the foreseeable future. She had not yet learned the shape of the person at the center of all of it. That would come later. It would come, as most things in her experience came, when she was least prepared for it and least expecting it, and there would be nothing she could do about the timing except survive it and move on. She was good at that too. The second week arrived with a hard frost and a list of extra duties that Mr. Aldred delivered at breakfast on Monday, with the same calm precision with which he delivered everything. Winter preparations, he explained. Checking seals on the older windows, preparing the less-used guest rooms against the cold, stacking the wood store that Owen would need access to through the dark months. Lyra added these to her mental roster without complaint. Physical work suited her. It gave her something to push against. She had been given a proper key ring by now, 5 keys, each labeled in Mr. Aldred's handwriting, with the room or area it opened. She had memorized which was which within the first hour. The bunch sat in her coat pocket and she noticed, with mild satisfaction, that she reached for the right key every time without looking. That was the week she began to understand what the house was actually like, when it was just a house, when she had moved past the newness of it, and it had stopped being a place she was learning, and started being a place she simply lived. The corridors stopped feeling like corridors she was navigating, and started feeling like corridors she moved through without thinking. The sounds of the building settled into background, the particular creak of the third stair from the bottom, the way the wind moved through the gap below the east wing door on cold nights, the sound the kitchen made at 6 in the morning when the heating came on and the pipes adjusted. She learned the house the way you learned a new body of water, first from the outside, the shape of the shore, and then by going in and feeling how it moved. On Tuesday of that week she had her first real conversation with Cade Delvar. She had not planned it. He had not announced it. It happened in the kitchen at 7 in the morning when she was making tea, and he walked in for something and stopped when he saw her there. She had seen him once before this, briefly, from across the main hallway, and she had registered an impression rather than a person. Tall, dark coat, moving fast. But in the kitchen, at that distance, she got an actual look. He was somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark hair, not especially long but not neat either. The kind of hair that looked like it had been pushed out of his face at some point and left there. He had a face that was serious without being unfriendly, the kind of face that suggested a lot went on behind it, and very little of it got mentioned. He was dressed simply, dark trousers and a gray pullover with the cuffs pushed up. He was holding his phone but not looking at it. He looked at her instead. "You're the new housekeeper," he said. "Yes," she said. "Lyra Voss." Cade Delvar. He said it the way people said their names when they did not expect it to mean anything, quickly, as a formality. Then he moved to the counter and reached past her for the coffee tin, which was on the shelf above where she was standing, and she stepped slightly to one side to give him room. "The east wing radiator on the second corridor," he said, measuring coffee into the press. "It's been making a sound." "I know," she said. "I reported it to Mr. Aldred on Thursday. He has a service call booked for Friday." He looked at her again, slightly longer this time. Then he said, "Good," and turned back to the coffee. That was the conversation, all of it. She carried her tea back to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the fact that she had just spoken to a person for 40 seconds in a kitchen and found it more interesting than most conversations she had in a week, and she told herself firmly that this was because he was unusual, and she was observant, and there was nothing else to it. She drank her tea, she got dressed, she went to work. Wednesday she cleaned the study between 10 and 12 as the supplementary rules specified, and the room was indeed empty. She could feel the absence of occupation in it, a subtle shift in the air, the way a room felt differently when a person had been in it recently versus not at all. The desk was organized but not sparse. There were books and papers that had clearly been there for weeks, the residue of ongoing work rather than set dressing. She cleaned around them carefully and did not move anything. There was a photograph on the corner of the desk, in a plain wooden frame, turned slightly so it faced the chair rather than the door. She saw it out of the corner of her eye and did not look at it directly. Some things in some rooms were not for the person cleaning to see. She had learned that early. She finished the study in 45 minutes and left. Thursday was uneventful in every way she could measure. Friday the radiator service came and went and the sound stopped. On Saturday she had the afternoon off, which was a scheduled thing she had not quite believed in until it actually arrived. She had not thought about what to do with it. She had been busy enough in the mornings that afternoons had felt like a concept rather than a reality. She put on her coat and walked down the road to the small village she had passed through on the bus. It had a post office, a shop with a decent selection, and a cafe that was warm and smelled of bread. She bought a book from the small rack near the door and sat at a table by the window and read it while she drank coffee. It was a novel about a family. It was ordinary in the best way. She read for 2 hours without her mind wandering once, which was better than it had done in a long time. When she walked back to the estate in the early evening, the gate was open, and Owen was working on something near the fence line with a torch. He nodded at her. She nodded back. She went inside. The house was quiet. The staff took Saturday evenings for themselves, and the main rooms were left until Sunday morning. She made herself a simple dinner and ate it in her room with the door open, listening to the sounds of the house settle. She had been here just over a week and a half. It felt, in some way she did not entirely understand, like she had been here longer, not in a bad way, in the way that some places fitted the shape of you faster than others. She thought about what Wren had said, contained. She thought about the study, and the photograph turned toward the chair. She thought about the landing on the main staircase where Mr. Aldred always stopped, and the stairs that kept going up past it. She closed her door and turned off the lamp and lay in the dark listening to the radiator, which no longer made a sound, and felt the ordinary, reliable weight of the evening pressing in around her, the familiar exhaustion of someone who had worked with their hands all week and was ready to sleep. She slept well. She slept the way she only slept in places where she had stopped expecting something bad to happen. She noted this without trying to make too much of it. She had been wrong about feeling safe before. She had been wrong about places before. But she had also been right about some of them, and the only way to tell the difference was to stay long enough to find out. She intended to stay. She was already, without fully deciding to, beginning to trust the particular silence of this house at night, the way it held itself, the way it did not rattle or press against her or make demands. She was beginning to trust the ordinary dailiness of it, the tea tin, the key ring, the frost on the garden in the mornings, Owen's nod at the gate. And she was beginning, without meaning to and without being able to stop it, to be curious about the person at the center of all of it. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt like a warning or a complication. Just curious, the way you were curious about a locked room, not because you were going to open it but because it was there. The week that followed started like the ones before it. Cold mornings and Owen's tools outside before 7, and the schedule on the pantry door, and Mr. Aldred's quiet presence moving through the house at its own efficient pace. But something had shifted by small degrees, the way temperature shifted between seasons, not enough to name in a single moment, only enough to notice in accumulation. She noticed it first in herself. She was less careful about which room she entered first in the mornings, following instinct rather than the written list. She moved faster through the work she knew well, and slower through the parts that interested her, the library shelves that held books in 3 languages, the window alcoves where the light came in differently depending on the cloud cover, the kitchen at the hour when everything smelled like coffee and old wood, and cold air that had just come through an open door. She noticed it also in the house itself. It had begun to show her things, not dramatically, just the small textures that a place revealed once you had been in it long enough. The scratch on the skirting board at the base of the library stairs, the window latch in the east corridor that was slightly warped and required a specific technique, the way the big hallway chandelier made a faint sound, almost like breathing, when the heating ran at full. She did not see Cade Dalver again until the following Wednesday. She had nearly finished the study. She was on her 3rd week of the Wednesday morning cleaning now, and had the room down to about 38 minutes, when she heard someone in the corridor outside. She had left the door slightly open as she worked, a habit she had developed because she found full closure in an empty room slightly unpleasant. She heard the footstep and recognized it before she consciously knew why. There was only one person in this house whose footsteps sounded like that. Too deliberate to be any of the staff, too quiet for someone who was not paying attention to the sound they made. She kept working. The door opened a little wider, and he came in. She registered his surprise before she felt her own. She had not been told the room would be occupied. He clearly had not expected anyone in it. "Wednesday," she said, without stopping what she was doing. A pause. "Right," he said. She heard him move toward the desk. She moved toward the window. For the next few minutes they occupied the room together without speaking, her cleaning and him going through something on his desk. and the silence between them was the kind that happened when two people had independently decided not to make something of the situation, which turned it into a kind of agreement. She finished the window and moved to the bookshelf. He did not leave. She was not sure if he had forgotten she was there or if he was waiting for her to finish. "The shelf on the far left," he said, without looking up from the desk. "The brackets are loose. I've been meaning to mention it." She went to it. She checked. He was right. The whole structure shifted slightly when she tested it. "I'll get Mr. Aldred to look at it this afternoon," she said. "Thank you." That was all. She finished within 5 minutes and gathered her things and left, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. She stood in the corridor for a moment, not for any reason, just for a breath. Then she went on to the next room. The bracket was fixed by Thursday. She made a note of it on her copy of the weekly report. When she passed the study door on Thursday morning, it was closed, which was its usual state outside of her Wednesday window. On Friday it rained, the kind of steady, purposeful rain that committed to its work and did not stop. Owen came in from the garden earlier than usual and sat in the kitchen with a mug of tea for half an hour before going back out. Wren and Lyra worked through the guest wing, which took longer on wet days because the windows needed extra attention. They talked while they worked, and Lyra found herself volunteering things without planning to, small things, nothing that mattered, but more than she usually offered. She mentioned that she liked the library. She mentioned that she had read through half the books she had bought in the village. She mentioned that she had called her younger brother on Tuesday and that the call had been fine, which meant they had talked for exactly 11 minutes and said nothing that needed to be said, and both pretended that was normal. Wren listened without pushing. She was good at that. She said, in the easy way she had, that Lyra seemed like the kind of person who carried things quietly. Lyra thought about this for a moment. "I think most people do," she said. "Maybe," said Wren. "But some people carry them louder." There was a window between them, spotted with rain. Lyra wiped it in long strokes and watched the garden go blurry and then clear with each pass. "Is that what he does?" she said. "Carries it quietly?" She did not say who she meant. She did not need to. Wren was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of not knowing what to say, the silence of deciding how much to say. "I think he carries it in a specific way," she said finally. "Controlled. Like he has a system for it, and the system works, and he does not want anyone asking questions about the system." Lyra thought about that. It sounded familiar in a way she did not examine. "Does it work?" she said. "The system." Wren picked up her cloth and turned to the next window. "Most of the time," she said. They worked through the rest of the guest wing in the comfortable silence they had established, and Lyra thought about systems that worked most of the time, and about what most of the time meant when it left the other part of the time unaccounted for. She had her own system. She was reasonably confident in it. She also knew what it felt like when a system developed a crack, not a collapse, just a small place where something could get in if it tried. She sealed those when she found them. She always had. Saturday brought another afternoon off, and she spent it differently this time. Walking the grounds rather than going to the village, she stayed inside the estate boundaries, following a path along the east side of the garden that eventually opened into a wide, flat field that felt like it was trying to become a meadow. She could see the house from here, which she had not done from this angle before. From a distance it looked different, smaller, in a way that made it feel more real. A stone house in a field with several chimneys and windows that caught the gray afternoon light. Not intimidating, just there, just occupied. She stood looking at it for a long moment. A crow landed near her feet and looked at her, and decided she was not interesting and flew away. She walked back when the light got thin. She went in through the side door and up to her room and washed her hands and sat on her bed and looked at the zipper pouch on the bedside table. She had not opened it since the night she arrived. She did not need to. She knew what was in it. A small amount of cash. The printed out copy of her contract. A photograph she kept because she could not bring herself to not keep it. A folded piece of paper with her brother's address on it. The new one. The one she had not memorized yet because memorizing it felt like admitting he had moved so far away. She did not open the pouch. She put it in the drawer instead, under some folded socks. Out of sight was not out of mind, but it was close enough for a Saturday evening. She made dinner. She ate it. She thought about the loose bracket on the study shelf, now fixed. She thought about a man who had sat in a lamplit room at 7 in the morning and had told her about a bracket without being asked, and had said thank you when she confirmed it would be handled. She thought about the word Wren had used, controlled. She thought about what things looked like when the control held and when it did not. Then she stopped thinking about it, because thinking about it was not a direction she needed to go, and she had come here to build something stable, not to walk toward complications with her eyes open. She turned off the lamp. She lay in the dark. The house settled around her, quiet and familiar now. It sounds like punctuation in a sentence she was learning to read. She let it be enough. It was, she decided. For now. The third week brought the first real trouble. Not drama. She had been in enough places to know what drama felt like when it was coming, and this was not that. It was subtler than that. It was the kind of trouble that showed up quietly and made itself at home before you had time to decide whether to let it in. It started with a sound. She was awake at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday, not because of the sound, but because she was one of those people who occasionally hit a wall of wakefulness in the middle of the night, a suddenly too awake feeling that sat on her chest like a small weight and refused to go away until she addressed it. Usually she lay still until it passed. Sometimes she made tea and read. She was lying still, working through her standard mental routine of thinking very boring thoughts in a very organized way, when she heard it. A sound from above her ceiling. Not a crash, not any kind of impact, just sound, movement. Something crossing the room above in a steady, deliberate way, pacing. She lay there listening. The third floor. She knew the layout well enough now. The room above her east wing quarters was at the far corner of the third floor, the room she could not see from the corridor and had not yet been close enough to identify. She had not thought much about it. She had not let herself think much about it. She listened to the pacing above her and something in her adjusted, the way things adjusted when a piece of information moved from one category to another. Not alarming, just significant. Someone was up there, and they were awake at 2 in the morning, and they were moving. She lay still for a long time. The pacing continued, steady and unhurried, and then at some point it stopped, and the silence that came after it was the kind that felt like a decision rather than an ending. She lay in it for another 10 minutes, and then it was clear nothing else was coming, and she let herself go back to sleep. In the morning she did not mention it to anyone. There was nothing to mention. She had heard something above her ceiling. It was a house. Houses had sounds. But she thought about it. She thought about it in the specific way she had of putting something in a corner of her mind and checking on it periodically, not obsessing, just keeping track. Thursday passed without incident. She cleaned, she organized, she fixed a stuck drawer in the second guest room, and replaced a light fitting in the hallway. Pip helped her with the light fitting and handed her things she needed and told her a mildly amusing story about a previous estate he had worked at, where the head housekeeper had discovered an entire colony of bats in the attic, and had dealt with them with such efficient calm that the bats seemed confused about who was in charge. Lyra laughed. It felt easy. Friday it happened again, same time, same ceiling. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the pacing, and this time noted that it had a pattern to it. A length, a turn, a return. The same sequence over and over. The length of one side of a room. Roughly 4 meters, she estimated, based on the time of the footstep. She was not frightened. She was a person who had lived alone in places that had strange sounds, and she had learned to sort them in the moment. Threat, non-threat, unknown but probably fine. This was unknown but probably fine. Someone was awake in the night, and they were walking. People did that. She had done it. There was nothing in it that required her to do anything. She went back to sleep at about 3:30. On Saturday morning she pulled on her coat before anyone else was up, and went outside and walked around the far end of the house, the end that was below the third floor, and stood back and looked up. She did this the way she did most things, practically, to gather information. She was not sure what she expected to see. She saw windows, 4 of them on the third floor, evenly spaced. The 2 in the center were dark and still. The one at the far right end had a curtain pulled across it, but the curtain was not quite meeting at the center, and there was a gap, very narrow, through which she could see a slice of the room beyond. She could not see into it from this angle. She was too far below. She stood for a moment, and then went back inside, and made tea, and thought about information. The thing about information was that it only mattered if you did something with it, otherwise it was just weight. She was carrying a small amount of extra weight now, a pacing sound at 2 in the morning, a curtain with a gap, the sense of a person who had not chosen to sleep when night came, and had instead chosen to walk the length of a room over and over until the decision became clear or the tiredness became undeniable. She knew what that felt like. She had her own version of it. She did not pace, but she had other things she did with the hours that would not cooperate. She drank her tea and thought about none of that, and went on with Saturday. That evening, she went to the library. She had started doing this on occasional evenings, not a habit yet, just something she had begun. The library was technically one of the formal rooms, but she had noticed that Mr. Aldred did not include it in the off-limits in evenings understanding. There was no rule against it, and no one was there. She pulled a book from a shelf and sat in one of the reading chairs by the cold fireplace and read for an hour and a half. It was a book about the history of landscape design in northern England. It was thorough and specific, and gave her mind something solid to work with. She put it back when she was done and walked back through the quiet house to her room. At the top of the stairs, she passed the corridor that led to the third-floor staircase. She did not look down it. She walked to her own room and closed her door and got into bed. She slept. She woke at 1:56. The pacing started at 2:04. She lay with her eyes open this time, counting. 4 meters. A pause. 4 meters. A pause. The count between turns was almost exactly 4 seconds, which meant whatever was happening in that room was not agitated pacing. It was measured. Deliberate. The movement of a person who was doing something with walking. Thinking perhaps, working through something that required motion. She had known people like that. Her father had been like that. When something was bothering him, he walked. Not anxiously. Just because walking gave the thought somewhere to go. She lay awake until 3:20. The pacing did not stop until a few minutes before she finally fell asleep. In the morning it felt like the kind of thing she should say something to someone about. Not in a concerning way. In a practical way. Was someone unwell? Was there something needed? But she also understood that this was a household where certain things were managed at a particular level, and she was not yet sure she was at that level. She left it alone. On Monday she was making her way through the main floor rooms when she passed Mr. Aldred in the hallway, and he asked how she was settling in, and she said, "Well, thank you." And then she said, after a brief pause, that she had noticed some movement on the third floor on a few nights. That she only mentioned it in case it was something she should be aware of. Mr. Aldred's expression did not change in any meaningful way. He said simply that it was nothing to be concerned about, that Mr. Dalvar sometimes found it difficult to sleep and kept unusual hours, and that the staff were accustomed to it and she need not worry. Of course, she said. She went on with her work. But she carried the information differently now. Not just a strange sound above a ceiling. A specific person. K. Dalvar, who ran this house and this land and whatever else he ran, who gave instructions through handwritten notes slipped under doors, who sat in a lamplit study at 7 in the morning with a book about land management, who apparently came alive in some different way at 2 in the morning when the house was asleep and walked the length of his room over and over until some particular thing resolved or did not. She thought about what Wren had said, the system that worked most of the time. She thought about what most of the time left uncovered. She was not going to make this into something it was not. She was not that kind of person. She had a job and a room and a life she was carefully, methodically building piece by piece from the rubble of the last one. She did not need to add complications to it. She did not need to walk toward anything unknown when she had only recently stopped running from something she knew too well. She cleaned the second-floor hallway and moved to the East Wing rooms and changed the linens in the 2 guest rooms that had had visitors last weekend. She folded the corners tight. She straightened the curtains. She left each room the way she had found it, but better. That was the job. That was what she was here for. The house was not a mystery to be solved. The person in it was not a puzzle she was responsible for. She was the housekeeper. She made things clean and orderly, and returned them to how they were supposed to be. She told herself this in a firm, reasonable tone, and believed approximately 70% of it. The other 30% she filed in the corner of her mind with the pacing and the curtain with the gap and the lamp that was always on. She would figure out what to do with the 30% later. She always did. But that Saturday she did something she had not done before. After her afternoon chores were finished and the house was settling into its quiet evening mode, she went to the library not to read, but just to sit. She was not looking for anything specific. She was doing what she did when things accumulated, and she needed to put them somewhere. She gave herself an hour to think without a task in hand. The library was empty, as it always was at this hour. She sat in the reading chair and did not open a book and looked at the fireplace and thought about the shape of where she had ended up. She thought about the list of rules slipped under her door, the third floor, the study on Wednesdays, the garden in the early mornings. Rules that made a kind of map of a person without describing them directly, the way you could know the shape of water by the shape of the container it was in. The container here was a very specific shape. She sat with that. She thought about her younger brother, who had moved 2 years ago to a different city, and who called on Tuesdays, and who said he was fine and meant it, mostly, and who never asked directly how she was, because he was more like her than either of them admitted, and both of them knew that asking directly never got you anywhere with the other one. He was the only person she had told about leaving, not what she was leaving, only that she was going. He had said, good. Just that. Good. She had thought about that word for 3 weeks afterward. Good as in, I'm glad. Good as in, you should have done it sooner. Good as in, I will not ask questions because I know you, and you will tell me when you are ready, and until then, I will just hold the fact that you are going without making it harder. She thought about the quality of that kind of understanding. The kind you did not have to explain yourself into. The kind that simply registered you and did not push. She had been in enough situations that required constant explanation to understand how rare the other kind was. She thought about the kitchen on Tuesday morning, and a man who had said the radiator was making a sound, and had said good, and had not asked anything about her at all, and about how that had felt, inexplicably, like something she recognized. She sat in the chair until the room got dark, and then she got up and turned the lamp on, and then thought better of it, and turned it back off and left the room as it was. She went to bed early. The pacing started at 2:17. She lay and counted the meters. 4. A pause. 4. A pause. She lay in the dark and thought, there is a person up there who is carrying something that does not fit in the hours allocated for it. She thought, I understand that entirely. She thought, that is not the same as being able to do anything about it. She turned over. She slept. The week ended, and the next one began, and the house continued its patient, stone-walled life around her, and she continued her careful, methodical life within it, and the 30% she had filed away grew very slightly larger but did not announce itself, and she managed it the way she managed everything that she was not yet ready to put words to. She kept working. She kept paying attention. She kept showing up. She was, she told herself, doing exactly what she had come here to do. She was also, and she knew this, beginning to suspect that what she had come here to do was not entirely the thing she had thought it was when she stepped off the bus. She did not examine that too closely. Not yet. But she did not look away from it either. That was the compromise she made with herself, in the quiet of the third week, not to look away. She thought that was probably enough for now. She thought, one thing at a time. And then she slept, and above her the house held its breath, and the night went on, as nights did, without asking anyone's permission. She supplemented that third week with something she had not expected to begin. Letters. Not ones she sent. She had a pad of writing paper she had packed without being sure why, and she started using it. She addressed the letters to her brother, the way she always addressed the things she needed to say aloud without saying them aloud, and she wrote. The first letter was about the house. 3 pages about the layout, the rooms, the schedule, the specific way the light moved through the east corridor windows at mid-morning. She wrote about the tea tin in the pantry, and Owen's nod at the gate, and the way Pip found everything mildly entertaining. She wrote about the bracket on the study shelf. She wrote about the landscape design book, and the library chair, and the crow that had looked at her in the field and decided she was not interesting. She did not write about 2 in the morning. She was not ready to put that in a letter yet, even a letter she was not going to send. She sealed it. She put it in the desk drawer. It sat there, quiet and heavy, like a small useful thing that was waiting to be needed. She wrote a second letter at the end of the week, shorter. She wrote, the house has its own sound at night. Not frightening, just specific. The kind of specific that makes you understand the difference between a building that is empty and a building that is held still. She stopped there. She sealed it. She put it in the drawer. She went to bed. At 2:09 the pacing started and she lay in the dark and listened to it and thought about a building that was held still and thought about all the effort that required and thought about who was doing the holding. 4 meters. A pause. She counted. She counted until she stopped, and she did not know when she had stopped because she was asleep. And the morning came, and she got up, and the day began. She thought, settling in. Whatever that meant. She was settling in. The thing Lyra would think about later was how ordinary the moment was right up until it was not. Tuesday. Just past noon. She had finished her assigned rooms for the morning, and had gone back to her own to change out of her work clothes because she had knocked a cleaning solution off the shelf in the east corridor linen closet, and it had caught the front of her uniform in a way that made the fabric smell like very aggressive lavender and feel damp against her skin. She had changed before lunch before. It was a reasonable thing to do. She had her door at the back of her heel, not latched, but almost. She had already unbuttoned her uniform top. The handle turned. The door opened. She had her back to it and her arms crossed, beginning to lift the uniform over her head, when she heard the soft sound of the door moving and turned. She froze. He froze. The door was open about 40 centimeters. Cade Dalver stood in the gap with one hand still on the handle, mid-sentence. She could see by the angle of his head that he had been speaking to someone behind him, out in the corridor, and had opened the wrong door without looking, or had looked at the wrong thing, and now his eyes had landed on her, and everything in him had stopped. It was not the stopping of embarrassment. That was the first thing she registered, some clear-headed part of her that was cataloging even while the rest of her stood very still with her arms crossed over herself. Embarrassment looked a certain way, a flinch, a redirect, the immediate move to close the door and back away. This was different. He was completely still, not rigid, still, like a person who had been in the middle of one thing and had stepped without warning into another, and the transition had not been processed yet, and so every system that usually ran on automatic had simply paused, waiting for the brain to catch up. His eyes were fixed on her. They did not move. Not in an intrusive way, not in a way she could have called anything but what it was, which was, stopped. He was stopped, and his eyes, she registered this second and clearly, were doing something. Something was happening in them that was not ordinary social discomfort. She had no name for it yet. She stood still. He stood still. The 10 seconds had a weight to them, a specific weight. She felt each one. In the first 3, neither of them moved. In the next 4, she became aware of what was happening on his face beneath the stillness. It was not what she expected. There was no performance of shock or apology. There was something older than that, something that had bypassed the social machinery entirely and was sitting right on the surface, unfiltered, for the length of those 4 seconds. In the last 3, she understood that she was watching something that he was about to put away, and that once he put it away, it would be sealed behind everything he had spent 2 years building. 10 seconds. Then something moved in his face, a deliberate, visible effort, and he stepped back. The door closed. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of any kind. The door clicked shut. She stood in her room for a long moment. Then she pulled the uniform the rest of the way off and put it in the laundry bag and stood in her clean clothes without moving for a little while. Her heart was doing something. She could feel it, not panic. She had been in enough alarming situations to know the difference between her body reacting to something alarming and her body reacting to something else, and this was the second kind. She was not afraid. What she was, she could not exactly name. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the door. He had been mid-sentence to someone. She had heard the voice before the door opened, low and clear, the kind of tone that was used to things. He had opened her door by accident. The rooms in this corridor looked identical from outside. She had nearly opened the wrong one herself in the first week. It was a simple mistake, a completely ordinary moment of wrong door. She was telling herself that. She was also telling herself that the way he had stopped was not ordinary. She picked up her staff phone from the dresser and looked at the time. 12:17. She had a lunch break and then the afternoon schedule, and she would go and do all of those things, and the morning would be exactly as unremarkable as it had been before the door opened, and she would not think about this. She put the phone down. She thought about it. Not in a swooping emotional way. She did not do things in swooping emotional ways, at least not the first time. She thought about it the way she thought about everything. In pieces, checking each piece for what was actually true rather than what felt true. What was actually true, he had opened her door by mistake. He had stopped. The stopping had lasted 10 seconds. He had closed the door without speaking. What felt true? The 10 seconds had felt like something. She could not name what, but something. The kind of something that did not come from ordinary embarrassment. She set both of those things side by side in her mind and looked at them. Then she went to lunch. Wren was in the kitchen and asked how her morning was, and Lyra said it had been fine and meant it, mostly. Pip had made a pot of soup that was better than he usually admitted to caring about. Owen came in with mud on his boots, and Mr. Aldred looked at the boots and then at Owen, and Owen took them off at the door without being asked, which appeared to be their long-standing arrangement. June said 3 words about the weather. Lyra ate her soup. None of them knew what had happened 20 minutes ago. None of them needed to know. She spent the afternoon on the upper-floor bathrooms, which was methodical work that suited a methodical brain, and she did it well, and finished on schedule, and took her cleaning things back to the supply room and cleaned those too, the way she always did, the way her own mother had taught her. Finish the job all the way through, and the next person who needs the tools finds them ready. She changed into her evening clothes. She made tea. She sat by the window and looked at the garden in the last of the afternoon light. She was thinking, and she knew she was thinking, and she was being fairly honest with herself about what she was thinking about, and the thing she kept coming back to was, his eyes had changed. Not in an obvious way, not in any way she could have described to another person without sounding like she was making things up, but she had been watching people for a long time, carefully, because watching people was how she knew which rooms were safe to be in and which were not, and she trusted what she had seen. Something had happened in him in those 10 seconds, something that was not ordinary human awkwardness. She thought about Ren's word again, contained. She thought about what contained looked like when, for 10 seconds, it slipped. She set her tea down and did not finish it, and went to bed early, and lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had been practicing for years, and which worked better on most nights than it did tonight. At 2, the pacing started above her. She lay there and listened and felt, for the first time, that the pacing was connected to something, connected to a person whose face she now had a very specific memory of. 4 meters. A pause. 4 meters. She lay still until almost 4 in the morning. She told herself, firmly and with some success, that she was not going to make anything out of any of this. She believed it slightly less than 70%. The morning after was a Wednesday. She did her regular assignments. She went to the study at 10 o'clock. She cleaned it in 37 minutes, which was a new personal best, and she did not pause over the desk or the photograph or the bookshelf. She left. She did not see Cade Dalvert in the morning, or the afternoon. She did not see him on Thursday either. She told herself, not noticing this. She was just noting it. There was a difference. On Friday morning she was in the east corridor with her cleaning supplies when she heard steps behind her and turned, and he was there, at the far end, coming out of the main hall staircase. He saw her. They were the only 2 people in the corridor. He walked toward her. She turned back to the window she had been cleaning, and finished the section she was on, and he passed her and kept walking, and she heard his study door open and close. No word exchanged. Nothing. She exhaled through her nose and moved to the next window. This was fine. This was entirely normal. 2 people who had briefly shared an embarrassing moment and had both decided, separately, to proceed as though it had not happened. This was the rational, adult, sensible outcome. She finished the corridor. She moved on. By the weekend, she had very nearly succeeded in filing the whole thing under irrelevant. Then on Sunday afternoon she was in the library, back in her evening reading habit, and she had been there about 40 minutes when she heard the door, and she looked up, and he came in. He did not stop when he saw her. He registered her with the same brief, serious look she was now familiar with, and then he moved to the shelves and pulled a book and turned back toward the door. Then he stopped. He looked at the book in his hand and then at her, and said, without preamble, "I owe you an apology." She set her own book down in her lap. "You do," she said, not unkindly. "I opened the wrong door. I should have knocked first regardless." "You should have," she said. He met her eyes. He had a directness about him that did not feel aggressive. It felt like someone who had stopped performing social softness at some point and had not been able to pick it back up, but who was at least being honest about what he was doing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," she said. A pause. "I also want to say," he said, and stopped, and started again. "I handled it poorly. In the door. I should have spoken." "You were very quiet," she agreed. Something moved at the edge of his expression, not quite a reaction, the shadow of one. "That's my default," he said. "I noticed," she said. Another pause, but this one was different. It had a different texture, less formal, less managed. "You read in here," he said. It was neither question nor observation, but somewhere between the two. "In the evenings," she said. "I should have asked." "No," he said. "It's fine. The library is not off limits." "I know," she said. Mr. Aldred's list was very specific. He looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to, and then said, "Good evening," and left with his book. She sat in the reading chair and looked at the empty doorway for a moment. Then she looked at her own book, then at the ceiling. She picked up her book. She read approximately 1 page before she realized she had not taken in a single word of it. She set it down. She sat in the chair in the quiet library and let the feeling that had been building in her chest for the last several days sit there, without naming it or moving it or doing anything at all about it. Just for a minute. Then she picked the book back up and read 4 pages properly, and then went to bed. She slept. The pacing started at 2:12. This time she did not lie still. She got up, made tea, sat at her small desk by the window, and wrote a letter to her brother that she would not send but that she needed to write. The kind of letter you wrote to put things in order in your own head without having to say them to someone who would ask questions. She wrote about the house. About Ren and Owen and Pip. About the frost on the garden and the library and the good tea tin in the pantry. She did not write about 10 seconds in a doorway or 2 in the morning footsteps above her head. Some things were still too much in motion to put in a letter. She sealed it anyway and put it in the desk drawer with the others she had not sent. Above her, the pacing went on. She sat and listened to it and drank her tea, and did not pretend to herself that she was thinking about anything else. She was thinking about a man who apologized directly and specifically, and without making it into something larger than it was, who said that quiet was his default, who had stood in the corridor of a library for 30 seconds longer than he needed to, and who walked a 4-meter stretch of a dark room at 2 in the morning with the measured pace of a person trying to wear something out. She thought about the fact that she recognized the shape of that. And then she thought, with the clear-eyed practicality that was her main defense mechanism and also, when it was working, her genuine best quality, that recognizing the shape of something was not the same as being part of it. She got back into bed at 20 to 4. The pacing had already stopped. The house was completely quiet. She lay in the silence and felt, all around her, the steady, stone-deep stillness of a place that had been holding things in its walls for a very long time. She thought, be careful. And then, before she could argue with herself about what being careful meant, be here first. One, then the other. She was still working out the order. She slept. The following Monday she found herself standing in the east corridor at 9 in the morning with a mop and a very clear sense that the physical work of the morning was doing something useful, which was keeping her hands moving while the rest of her decided what it thought. She had been running the same set of thoughts through the same filters since Sunday evening, and she was running them again now, not because they changed anything, but because that was what her brain did with unresolved things. It turned them over and over, until all the edges were known. The 10 seconds, the apology, the library, the way he said that quiet was his default, which was either simply true or was something more, and she could not yet tell which because she did not have enough data, and she was a person who preferred to have enough data before she came to any conclusions that mattered. She mopped the corridor. She went on to the next section. She thought about the letter she had written in the night. She thought about the fact that she had not written about the door. She thought about why. She wrote things in letters she did not send because she could not bear to say them to anyone real, not because they were shameful, just because they were the particular kind of true that needed a container before it could be looked at. The drawer full of unsent letters was her container. She used it regularly. The fact that she had not written about the door meant one of two things. Either it was not yet ready to be contained, which meant it was still too raw, or it was not the kind of thing she put in the container because it was not the kind of thing she had and kept, but the kind she was going to act on. She stopped mopping. She stood in the corridor with the mop handle and thought, that is a very specific distinction for me to have just made. She had not thought she was going to act on anything. She had been fairly certain, for days now, that she was going to manage this the way she managed everything, which was to understand it and then set it aside. But the drawer was for things she kept. The things she acted on she had never needed to write down. She filed this as information. She mopped the rest of the corridor. She was not going to do anything differently. Not today. But she allowed herself to hold the knowledge that the distinction existed, that there was a difference between the thing in the drawer and the thing that did not go in the drawer, and that she appeared, without having decided to be putting this in the second category. She went on to the next room. She cleaned for the rest of the morning without thinking about anything except the cleaning, which was what she did when she needed to let something settle. By lunchtime it had settled, not into an answer, just into something more stable than it had been. She was in this house. She was going to stay in this house. She was paying attention to someone in this house in a way that she had not paid attention to anyone in a long time, and the quality of that attention was not purely professional, and she knew it, and now she was done pretending she did not know it. That was all. The rest would come when it came, or it would not come, and she would stay anyway, because she had decided to stay, and she was good at deciding things and sticking to them, even when they required more from her than she had expected. She sat down to lunch. She ate her soup. The afternoon was ordinary, and the evening was ordinary, and the night was quiet, and she slept through all of it, and in the morning she got up and it was just another morning. That was enough. That, she thought, was more than enough. The week that followed the library exchange was the one that showed Lyra something she had not expected to learn this soon. It showed her that people could change the charge of a space without doing anything at all. She had not spoken to Cade Dalver again since Sunday evening. She had not seen him except in passing, once on the main staircase where he had gone up and she had been coming down, and they had moved to opposite sides without needing to discuss it, and once through the window of the east corridor when he was outside crossing the garden in the early morning, moving with the kind of speed that looked purposeful even at a distance. They had not exchanged words, and yet the house felt different. She could not explain this in any way that would have sounded reasonable out loud. Nothing had changed. The schedule was the same. Her rooms were the same. the staff was the same. But something in the texture of being in this building had shifted, and it had shifted in the specific, identifiable way of, she was now aware of another person in it. Before, she had been aware of the house as a shared space, with other people who moved through it. General awareness. Background. Now there was a particular awareness, a specific location she was always, without trying, tracking, whether a door was open or closed, whether a set of footsteps was his, whether a light was on in the corridor outside the study. She found this irritating. Not in a dramatic way, just the low-level, practical irritation of a person who had organized her life around not doing this kind of thing, who had very specific and well-documented reasons for keeping her attention on things that were manageable and that she could actually affect. She was not going to develop an awareness of another person in this house. It was not helpful. It was not relevant. It was not what she was here for. She was here because she had needed to be somewhere that was not anywhere she had been before. She had found the listing on a regional job board, applied with the correct materials, received a prompt and professional response, and had arrived with a cardboard box and a practical plan. That was the story. It did not have a complicated second act. She cleaned the Thursday hallways with slightly more force than usual. Ren noticed. Ren said nothing. She passed Lyra the floor mop with the expression of someone who had reached a decision not to ask. By Friday afternoon, Lyra had processed most of the irritation into something more functional, and had arrived at a working position, which was, she was aware of him. That was fine. Awareness was just information. She could have information without it becoming anything. She was very convincing about this, internally, until Saturday morning. She was in the kitchen at 6:30, earlier than her usual schedule, but she had woken early, and lying in bed had started to feel like an argument she was losing. She had come down to make tea. She had the kettle on and she was standing at the window looking at the garden in the cold pre-light, when she heard him. He came through the door from the back hall, already dressed, dark clothing and the coat, and he stopped in the same way he had stopped on the first morning she had met him. But this time she was facing the window, not the room, and she turned, and he was looking at her, and for the space of about 3 seconds neither of them accounted for the other. Then he said, "Early." "Yes," she said. "You as well." He moved to the counter and she shifted aside and he took the coffee tin from the shelf above and she noted, as she had before, that his movements in a kitchen were the movements of a person who had been doing this specific routine for a long time. Efficient, unpretentious, not looking for anything to be different than it was. "Did you hear something last night?" he said, facing the counter, not looking at her. She was quiet for a moment. "What kind of something?" "From the east wing. I was in the corridor around midnight. I thought I heard a door." She thought about midnight. She had been asleep by 11. "Not me," she said. "Owen thought it might have been the window in the third guest room. It's been catching in the wind." "I can check the latch today," she said. "Thank you." The kettle finished. She poured her tea. He pressed the coffee and waited. They were in the kitchen together, and the silence between them was not the silence of two strangers. She noticed this with the same precise, slightly unwilling attention she had been directing at him all week. She took her tea. "The bracket on the library shelf is still holding," she said, because something practical and relevant was better than the alternative. He looked at her, directly, the way he did, the way she had come to recognize as his actual mode, rather than a particular signal. "You check it?" "Every Wednesday," she said. "It was loose before. I checked the ones that have been repaired." He was quiet for a moment. "That's more thorough than the schedule requires." "The schedule is a minimum," she said, "not a ceiling." He looked at her for one beat longer than usual. "Yes," he said. "That's right." She took her tea and went back to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and held the mug and looked at the wall and thought about the things she was not going to think about. Then she got dressed for work and went and checked the latch on the third guest room window, which was, as Owen had suspected, slightly loose and catching in the wind. She tightened it. She noted it in the weekly report. She moved on. On Sunday the pacing started at 1:40. She was already awake. She did not know why. She lay in the dark and heard it begin. The 4-meter length, the pause, the return, and she did not count this time. She lay still and let it be what it was, and felt the particular quality of the house at this hour, the specific weight of a building where two people were awake in the dark, and neither of them could do anything about it. She made tea eventually, and sat at her desk, and did not write a letter this time, just sat. She looked at the little pile of unsent letters in the desk drawer. She thought about writing one more. She thought about what she would put in it. She thought about a man who said quiet was his default, and who walked 4 meters over and over in the night hours, as though the walking would eventually arrive somewhere. She thought about how she had come here running from something and had landed, apparently, in the orbit of someone else who was also in some kind of motion, not running, but walking in that particular controlled, measured way that looked like stillness from the outside and was absolutely not stillness from the inside. She thought about the fact that she understood that completely. She did not write the letter. She went back to bed. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and listened to the pacing, which continued until 3:20, and then stopped. And in the silence after it, she felt the house settle around her, all that stone and old wood and whatever it was that old houses held in their walls, and she thought, this is not simple. She had known that for a while, she supposed. She had just been convincing herself it was. On Monday she got up at 5:50 and made tea, and was in the kitchen when Cade came down at 6:07. She did not look up from the window. He made his coffee. They did not say anything. When she finally left the kitchen, he was standing at the counter with his mug, and he was watching her leave, and she felt it without turning around, the specific directional awareness of a person's attention on the back of her head, and she walked through the door into the hall and did not let herself check. She had come here to build something stable. She was still doing that. She was just building it in a more complicated house than she had expected. She was also, she admitted, somewhere private and internal where she could be entirely honest, starting to think that complicated might not be the worst thing in the world. She had thought that before, about other places, other people. She held that thought at arm's length. But she did not put it down. The days went by in their ordinary way, and she let them, and inside all the ordinary days something was quietly becoming more real, the way frost became more real as winter deepened. Not by announcing itself but by simply being there every morning when you looked. She noticed, specifically, that she had begun to do things she had not consciously decided to do. She began leaving the coffee tin on the counter after she used it in the mornings rather than putting it back immediately, because he came in after her and reached for it, and the reaching required less of him when it was already out. She began noting when his light was on in the study, and adjusting her corridor cleaning to the other side so that the sound of her work did not interrupt whatever he was in the middle of. She began to understand that when she saw his door was open, it meant he was somewhere in the middle of thinking rather than working, and that the open door was not an invitation but a condition, and that the right response to it was to leave the condition undisturbed. None of this required words. None of it required decisions. It just happened, in the way that understanding happened when you had been paying enough attention for long enough, and she let it happen without examining it too closely, because examining it too closely would have required her to name it, and she was not ready to name it yet. She was just going to keep doing the job. She was going to keep checking the brackets and tightening the latches and noting the things that needed noting, and leaving the coffee tin where it was useful and moving to the other side of the corridor when the study door was open. She was going to keep being here, and she was going to let that be enough for right now, because right now it was, and that was the most honest thing she had thought in weeks. The week she was in now was the 4th week, and it had a different quality than the ones before it. The house was colder. The days ended sooner. The work was the same, but the light it happened in was different, shorter and lower, the kind of light that made everything feel slightly more significant than it actually was. She did not mind the dark coming early. She had always been a person who found the evening hours more manageable than the bright, exposed hours of mid-afternoon, when there was nowhere to hide from what you were thinking. On Wednesday she cleaned the study, and the photograph was on the desk as always, turned toward the chair as always, and she looked at it again. The way she had begun to look at it, directly and without making a thing of it, a woman with a clear, full smile, outdoors, somewhere bright. She finished the study in 35 minutes and stood for a moment in the corridor outside before going on. She thought about the photograph. She thought about what it meant to leave a photograph on your desk turned toward the chair you always sat in. She thought about what it meant to keep it there every day for however long it had been there. She thought about grief that had been organized into a routine, given a place on a desk and a specific angle, and a reason to stay visible. She had her own version of that, not a photograph, the zipper pouch in the drawer, the pile of unsent letters, the things she kept not because keeping them was comfortable, but because letting go of them would require her to decide something she had not yet decided. She thought, we are both, in our specific ways, not ready. And then, not ready is not the same as never. She filed that in the corner of her mind where she kept the things she was not done with yet. She went on to the next room. By Thursday she had been in the house exactly 1 month. She had not marked the date particularly. She noted it the way she noted things, without ceremony, just as information, added to the running account she kept of where she was and how long she had been there. 1 month. She thought about who she had been when she got off the bus with the cardboard box. She thought about the way she had picked everything up off the gravel, without hurrying, because there was no point hurrying, because the next bus would not come until morning. She thought about the person she was now, 1 month later, who had a key ring with 5 keys and a favorite tea tin, and a reading chair in the library, and a drawer full of unsent letters, and a very specific awareness of the sound of one person's footsteps in a corridor. She thought, that is more change than I expected in 1 month. She thought, most of it is good. She stood at the east wing window at the end of her Thursday afternoon, and looked at the garden in the early dark, and thought about goodness, the particular kind that was quiet and structural rather than dramatic and announced, the kind that showed up in small things like a warm radiator, and a working latch, and a colleague who passed you things without being asked. She thought about what she was building here. She thought, something real. She turned away from the window. She went to dinner. She ate with the others and listened to Pip tell a story about a bird and Owen's response to the bird, and she laughed in the right places. And she was present, genuinely present, in the way she had not been in a long time before she came here. After dinner she went to the library and read for an hour, and the reading was good. She lost herself in it, the way you lost yourself in things when your mind had enough room to be somewhere other than its own problems. She went to bed at 10. She was asleep before 10:30. The pacing started at 2:22. She heard it. She lay still and heard it. 4 meters. A pause. 4 meters. She thought, 1 month ago I did not know that sound. She thought, now it is part of the house for me, the same as the radiator and the third stair and the east wing door in the wind. She turned over. She went back to sleep. In the morning she got up and made tea and went to work, and the house was itself and she was herself, and everything was as ordinary as it always was, and also, in some way she was increasingly sure of, more than it had been before, more than she had let herself have in a long time. She was careful not to hold it too tightly, but she was also done pretending it was not there. Saturday of the 4th week brought a thing she had not expected, a delivery addressed to her. Not the estate address, though it had been sent there. Her name, in her brother's handwriting, on a small brown package that Mr. Aldred set on the kitchen table while she was eating breakfast, and said had arrived with the morning post. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in her coat pocket and took it upstairs to her room before opening it. Inside was a book, a thin one, the kind that was all images, about a subject she had mentioned to him years ago and then forgotten she had mentioned. There was no note, just the book, wrapped in brown paper, with her name in his handwriting. She sat on the bed and held it. She thought about 11-minute phone calls that said nothing that needed to be said, and still said everything. She thought about a brother who remembered things she had mentioned years ago and sent them without ceremony. She thought, good, just that, good. She put the book on the windowsill with the others. Then she went back downstairs and ate the rest of her breakfast and went to work. In the corridor, just before noon, she passed Cade coming from the direction of the garden. He was carrying something, a paper folded over something else, the kind of carrying that said a task had just been completed rather than begun. He slowed when he saw her, not quite stopping. Owen sorted the east gate hinge, he said. It's been pulling since last week. Good, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Not the long, loaded look of the Tuesday doorway, just the ordinary assessment of someone who was checking something. You look better than you did this morning, he said. She was slightly surprised, not by the observation but by the fact that he had made it. I got a package, she said, from my brother. He nodded. That was all. Just nodded and went on past her. She stood for a moment in the corridor. She thought, he noticed I looked less than well this morning. She thought, he noticed I lay. She filed this in the specific drawer she had decided to keep for information that was not yet ready to be anything else. Then she went on with her work. The afternoon was cold and bright, and the garden through the kitchen window looked like a painting that had decided to be a garden instead. She checked 3 window latches after lunch, and all 3 were holding. She logged it. She moved on. By evening, she had the comfortable, low-key exhaustion of a person who had been useful all day, and she sat in her room before dinner and looked at the book her brother had sent and thought about the specific quality of being known by someone. It was different from being seen. Being seen was something that happened between strangers, the moment of recognition before you had the language for each other. Being known was what came after, When you had accumulated enough shared moments that the other person could send you a book about a subject you mentioned years ago without needing to explain why. She thought about what it would take to be known here. She thought about what she was willing to offer in exchange for it. She thought, more than I thought I was, probably. She put the book down. She went to dinner. She ate. She said goodnight to everyone. She went to her room and turned off the lamp and lay in the dark and thought about nothing, and then about one thing, and then about nothing again. And then she slept. The house held her the way it always did, steadily, without drama. She let it. Ren had the kind of work ethic that disguised itself as personality. She showed up early, moved efficiently, never needed to be told something twice, and organized her portion of the schedule with a quiet competence that Lyra had come to rely on. The way you came to rely on a good clock, not dramatically, just structurally. You stopped thinking about it and started thinking around it. The two of them had settled into a rhythm that was past the point of needing to be defined. They worked the same rooms on some mornings and different areas on others, and they took breaks at overlapping times and sometimes talked and sometimes did not, and neither state required explanation. It was Tuesday afternoon, in the utility room, the middle of October. They were sorting laundry. The guest rooms had been in use over the weekend, and outside the window the rain was doing the thing it had been doing since morning, which was committing fully to being rain, no half measures. Ren said, without much preamble, that she had noticed Lyra seemed like she was turning something over. Lyra considered the sheet she was folding. "I'm always turning things over," she said. "It's how I think." "Sure," said Ren, "but this one's been going on for about a week." Lyra folded the sheet. She took another. She thought about how much to say and how to say it, and whether to say anything at all, and then she said, "I'm trying to understand the layout of the house, not the rooms, the people." Ren made a small sound that was not quite agreement but was not disagreement either. "He walked past the corridor yesterday," Lyra said. "I was at the window, and I could tell he was going to turn and look at the garden, and then he decided not to and kept walking." There was a pause. "That's a very specific thing to notice," Ren said. "I notice specific things. I've noticed that." Another pause. The rain outside increased briefly and then settled. "What do you want to know?" Ren said. The question was careful. It had edges on it that said, "I'll tell you some things and I'll decide as I go how much, and I won't be pushed on it." Lyra respected that. She operated the same way herself. "Why does he walk at night?" she said. Ren was quiet for a moment. She picked up a pillowcase and shook it flat. "How do you know about that?" "The East Wing room above mine is directly below the north end of the third floor," Lyra said. "Sound carries in old stone buildings." Ren nodded slowly. "He's done it since I arrived," she said. "Mr. Aldred says he slept worse after things changed, about 2 years ago, that he had a period of very bad sleep and that it was better now than it had been." Lyra thought about better than it had been, and what that scale looked like. "What changed?" she said. "Not pushing, just offering the space if Ren wanted to fill it." Ren looked at the window for a moment. "The rain. He lost someone," she said. "His partner. I don't know the details. I didn't ask and no one offered. But it's the kind of thing you can feel in a house. Something that was here is not anymore." Lyra thought about that. She thought about the photograph on the desk, turned toward the chair. "How did they describe him?" she said. "Before." Ren looked at her. "I wasn't here before." "No," Lyra said, "but you said better than it had been, so someone described a before." Ren almost smiled. "Mr. Aldred mentioned once that the house used to have more people in it, more activity, that things had simplified." "Simplified." Lyra rolled the word. "He seems," she said, carefully, "like he runs on a very controlled system." "He does," said Ren, "and the system mostly works." "I've heard you say mostly before." "I use it on purpose." Ren set the pillowcase aside. "There are moments where you can tell it costs him, but he doesn't show those moments to anyone. He closes them off very fast." Lyra thought about 10 seconds in a doorway. She thought about a man who had stood completely still for the kind of stretch of time that did not happen by accident, when ordinary embarrassment would have resolved in 1 or 2 seconds. She thought about something happening in his eyes that she still did not have a name for. She thought about closes them off very fast. She thought about what it looked like when someone closed things off fast, to a person who was trained from years of close watching, to see the fraction of a second before the closing happened. "He apologized to me," she said, "last week." Ren looked at her. "He opened the wrong door by accident," Lyra said. "He apologized for it later, in the library." Ren was quiet for a moment. "He came to find you to apologize?" "He came to the library for a book," Lyra said. "He saw me, and he did it then." "Was it a good apology?" Lyra thought about it. Yes, she said. It was specific. He said what the thing was, said he had handled it poorly, and said he was sorry. No extra words around it. Wren was nodding slightly, in the way of someone confirming something they had already suspected. That tracks, she said. He doesn't add words to things. No, said Lyra, he doesn't. The laundry was mostly sorted. The rain outside had gone steady again. Lyra began folding the last set of towels, working from corner to center the way her mother had taught her so they lay flat without bulk. Are you okay? Wren said. It was a simple question. It was not asking about the wrong door or the library or any specific thing. It was asking about the accumulation. Lyra folded the last towel. She smoothed the edge. She set it on the pile. I came here, she said, because I needed to be somewhere that was not anywhere I had been before. I know, said Wren. And I've been here for almost a month, and I have a job I'm good at, and a room that's warm, and people who are… She stopped. You're fine, she said simply. All of you. Mr. Aldred, Owen, Pip, you. You're all fine. But, said Wren. But, Lyra said. I'm paying attention to the wrong person. Wren did not look surprised. She looked like a person who had been waiting for this to be said, and was relieved it had been. Is it wrong? She said. It's complicated, Lyra said. Those are not the same thing. Lyra thought about that. She stacked the towels and put them on the shelf. She straightened the shelf. She stood in the tidy utility room with rain on the window and felt the truth of what Wren had just said sitting in her chest. Complicated and wrong were not the same thing. She had treated them like they were for a long time. He walks at 2 in the morning, she said, over the same 4 meters. Like he's trying to get somewhere and the room will not let him. I know, said Wren. And I lie awake and listen to it, Lyra said. And I think about what it feels like when the thing you're carrying is too heavy to set down, and too heavy to keep holding. And you just have to keep moving. Because stopping would mean it lands on you. The utility room was very quiet. You know what that's like, Wren said. Yes, Lyra said. So do I, said Wren. So does everyone who ends up in a place like this, somewhere far enough from their last life that the signal cuts out. Lyra looked at her. We all came here for a reason, Wren said simply. That's not a bad thing. It's just true. Lyra thought about the cardboard box she had carried off the bus on a cold October afternoon. She thought about what was in it, and what was not in it. She thought about the zipper pouch in the drawer, and the pile of unsent letters beside it. I don't want to make it into something it is not, she said. You won't, said Wren. You're too careful for that. Being careful has not always helped, Lyra said. No, said Wren, but being aware is different from being reckless. You can notice something without it becoming a decision. Lyra picked up her supply bag and moved it to the door. She stood there for a moment. She thought about a lamplit room at 7 in the morning, about an apology made cleanly and directly, about someone who said quiet was his default. He said quiet was his default, she said. Yes, said Wren, it is. What was he like when it was not? Wren shook her head. I don't know. I only know what I know. Lyra nodded. She opened the door. The hallway was cool and quiet outside. Wren, she said. Yes? Thank you. I didn't say anything useful, said Wren. You said things I needed to hear, Lyra said. That's not the same thing, but it's better. She went back to her afternoon rounds. She cleaned the second-floor bathrooms. She checked the window latch in the far guest room, which was still holding. She went down to the kitchen and made a note in the staff logbook about the loose shelf in the airing cupboard that she had noticed 3 days ago and kept forgetting to log. She moved through the rest of the afternoon with the careful, steady focus that was her natural mode when she was processing something, working with her hands while her brain organized the interior. By dinner, she had organized most of it. She ate with the others and listened to Pip's story about the bird and Owen's response, and she laughed in the right places, and she was present. After dinner, she went to her room and sat at her desk and opened the drawer and looked at the unsent letters. Then she took out a fresh piece of paper. She wrote, You asked how things were going. They're going in the way that places go when they're the right place, even when the right place is still slightly beyond what you're ready for. She stopped. She looked at what she had written. She thought about who she had addressed it to in her head, her brother, because he was the one she wrote to even when she did not send it. She folded the paper and put it in the drawer. She did not add it to the unsent pile. She left it separate. She got into bed. At 2:10, the pacing began above her. She lay and listened and thought about 2 people in the same stone building on the same dark night, neither of them sleeping, each of them carrying something that was too well known to be alarming anymore. She thought about what Wren had said. Complicated and wrong are not the same thing. She thought about that. The pacing continued, steady and quiet. She turned onto her side. She closed her eyes. She slept, eventually, with the sound of it still going above her, as though it were simply part of the house now, part of its rhythm, a clock that ran a different kind of time. She thought, I see you. Not to him, just to the sound. Just to the fact of it. I see you. And then she was asleep. The following day, Lyra did something she had not done since the first week. She stood at the base of the third-floor staircase and looked up. Not for long, not with any intention. She had been coming from the east corridor and had taken a wrong turn, or had not quite taken a wrong turn, and she was at the bottom of the stairs with the darkness of the upper landing above her and the quiet that lived there filtering down. She stood and looked up for about 10 seconds. Then she turned and went back the way she had come. She did not tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. She had stood at the bottom of a staircase and looked up. People did that. But she carried it differently. She carried it the way she carried things that had a meaning she had not quite assembled yet, present in her mind without quite being formed. She thought about it later that evening while she was folding the edge of her blanket straight. She thought about what it meant that she had walked toward the staircase at all. She had not been assigned to it. She had not been going anywhere near it. She had just gone. And she had stopped herself. She thought, I stopped myself. And then, I stopped myself this time. She pressed the edge of the blanket flat. She looked at the window, which was dark and showing her a version of the room behind her in reflection, a ghost room, everything the same but backwards. She thought, at some point stopping is going to require more effort than going. She thought, I am not yet sure which side of that line I am on. She went to bed. Thursday was ordinary in all the ways she had come to depend on. Friday was ordinary too. By Friday afternoon she had the reassuring sense of a week that had been worked through properly, all the things attended to, all the notes made, all the repaired things still holding, and the logged things logged. She went to the library on Friday evening and read for 2 hours, and was fully absorbed for most of it, which was the measure she used for whether she was actually all right, or just performing all right. When she was fully absorbed in a book, she was actually all right. When she was performing, she found herself reading the same sentence 4 times without it landing. 2 hours. Fully absorbed. She was actually all right. She put the book back. She walked through the quiet house to her room. She got into bed. She fell into the specific deep early sleep of someone who has genuinely tired themselves out, rather than just run down the clock. The pacing started at 2:01. She registered it distantly, from deep enough in sleep that it did not bring her fully up. 4 meters. A pause. She went back under. She slept through the rest of it. In the morning she felt, for the first time in several weeks, genuinely rested. She thought about that as she made her tea. She thought about what it said about where she was. She had stopped lying awake to listen. She had started sleeping through. Something had changed. She was not sure what. She thought, maybe it doesn't matter what. She drank her tea. She went to work. Outside the window, the estate was doing its morning thing. Owen already at the far end of the garden. The frost on the grass that would be gone by 9. A normal day. A good day. She stood at the window for a moment before the morning began properly, and she held her mug, and she was quiet, and the house was quiet, and everything was just what it was. She thought, right here. She thought, this. She put the mug down and went to work. The weekend brought Hal. He arrived on Friday evening, after she had gone to her room, and she knew about him only from hearing Mr. Aldred's voice in the hall and then another voice, brighter than what she was used to in this house. The kind of voice that had presence in it the way some voices did, not loudness, just density. She did not see him that evening. She heard him through the wall of the dining room when she was passing on her way to the kitchen for a late cup of tea, and she registered the sound of 2 people talking, and the quality of that talk, easy and specific, the kind between people who had known each other long enough to skip the surface. She went to bed. In the morning she met him. His name was Hal, and he was slightly shorter than Cade and considerably louder, in the most unpretentious way, the kind of volume that was not performing anything, but simply came from someone who moved through the world at a high rate of engagement. He came through the front door with a bag slung over one shoulder, and found her in the hallway before he had found anyone else, and said, immediately and without introduction, "You must be the new housekeeper. You're who I want to talk to about the window latch in the green room. Cade said you'd fixed it. Did it hold?" She said yes. She had checked it twice since the repair. It was holding. He said excellent and thanked her by name, which meant he had already known her name, which meant Cade had mentioned her. She filed this away without making a face about it. Hal was the kind of presence that changed the temperature of a house, not in an overwhelming way, just in the way that certain people brought a current of air with them, some fundamental shift in atmosphere that was not better or worse than what had been there before but was distinctly different. She observed him over the course of the morning without being obvious about it. She was good at that. She noted that he talked more than Cade by a significant margin, but that the content was not empty. He said things that went somewhere. She noted that he and Cade moved around each other in the comfortable, slightly territorial way of siblings who had spent years negotiating the same shared spaces. She noted that Cade's posture changed slightly when Hal was in the room, not looser exactly, but differently arranged, less managed. At dinner that evening, which she was not part of but passed the dining room during, she heard Hal's voice, and then a sound she had not previously catalogued in this house, Cade laughing. Brief, low, but unmistakable. She kept walking. She did not stop or slow, but she carried the sound with her all the way back to her room, and she sat with it for a moment, turning it over. People were not flat, she knew this. Everyone had a version of themselves that existed only in specific conditions, in certain rooms, with certain people, in the frequency of a relationship that had known them long enough to see through to the original self beneath the one they had built for general use. The laugh had been low and quick, and it had stopped fast, as though the body that produced it was slightly surprised by it, but it had happened. She thought about what Wren had described, the house with more people in it, more activity. She thought about something that had been in this house, and now was not. She thought about what absence cost, when it was specific, when it was the kind that changed the acoustics of a whole building. She sat in her room with the door slightly open and listened to the distant sound of the evening, Hal's voice carrying occasionally from the main rooms, and once more the brief low note of Cade's laugh, and she let herself listen without pretending she was not. The night was quiet, no pacing above her ceiling. She noted this. She thought, something in the house is different tonight. She thought, different is not bad. She slept early, and well, and the morning came with the sound of Hal's voice in the garden below her window, and she lay for a moment listening to the shape of it, and felt something she did not entirely name, but that was close to relief. Relief that the house could hold this too. Voices, laughter, an ordinary weekend with two brothers and a garden pushing in through all the seams. She got up, she made tea, she went to work. On Saturday afternoon, Lyra had time off, and she went to the library because it was raining and she did not want to go to the village. She was 20 pages into her landscape design book when the door opened and Hal came in. He looked at her and said, "Good. Someone to talk to. Everyone else is pretending to be busy." She looked at him. He pulled a chair from the reading cluster on the other side of the fireplace and sat in it and said, without warmth but with complete sincerity, "You mentioned you'd been reading in here in the evenings. I was curious." "About the reading," she said. "About the person who came here with one box," he said, "and who fixed the window latch without being asked, and who apparently tells my brother things with no spare words around them." She held very still for the second it took her to calibrate her response. "He told you that," she said. "He told me you said the schedule was a minimum, not a ceiling," Hal said. That was the exact quote. He was not describing it negatively. She looked at her book. She looked at Hal. She thought about what to say to a man who had walked into a room and immediately laid out exactly what he was doing, which was assessing her, and who had done it with so little performance that it almost did not feel like assessment. "You're direct," she said. "Waste of time otherwise," he said. "I'm only here for a weekend." "What do you want to know?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. He had Cade's eyes in a different context, the same quality of taking things in without announcing the process, but without Cade's careful constraint around the output. "I want to know if you're going to do something about the fact that this house needs something to change in it," he said. She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm the housekeeper," she said. "I know what you are," he said. "I'm asking what you think." She thought about the unsent letters, about the pacing above her ceiling, about a corridor at 7 in the morning and a man who said quiet was his default, about a laugh she had heard through a wall. "I think," she said carefully, "that it's not my place to do anything." "That's a very managed answer," Hal said. "I know," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he sat back and picked up a book from the side table, a different book, not hers, and opened it without looking at the title, and said, "He hasn't laughed in this house in a long time." She did not respond. I came down, and he was standing in the hall this morning after breakfast, Hal said, still looking at the book, just standing there, and he had this expression on his face that he used to have before. Not sad, not anything obvious. Just like there was something in his field of attention that he did not know what to do with. She was very still. He used to look like that in the good years, Hal said, when something was pulling his attention in a direction he had not planned. He's an extremely deliberate person. That look means the deliberate part is not fully in charge. She thought about the library, about the 10 seconds in the doorway, so did I. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Hal said. I'm telling you what I observed. All right, she said. He put the book back on the side table. He stood up. He paused at the door on his way out. He has a very good system, he said. He built it himself, carefully, after things got hard. It works. I know, she said. Good systems can be a cage, he said, if you build them when you're afraid, and never review them when the fear has changed. Then he was gone. She sat in the reading chair with her landscape design book in her lap, and the fireplace that was not lit in front of her, and the rain against the library window behind her. She sat with everything Hal had said and everything he had not said, and everything she already knew, and everything she was still figuring out. She was not going to do anything with it tonight. She was going to sit here and let it settle the way information settled when it was true, not quickly, not with fanfare, just into the existing architecture of what you already believed, until the new thing and the old things were indistinguishable. She read 3 pages. Then she stopped reading and just sat. The house outside the library was quiet in the way it was always quiet on Saturday afternoons, a particular gentled-down version of its weekday self, the staff at rest, the work at rest, just the building doing its oldest job, which was holding. She sat in the quiet and let it hold her too. She thought about a cage built when you're afraid. She thought about her own cages. She thought about the drawer full of unsent letters and what they were really for. She thought about running, and about stopping, and about the difference between choosing to be still and being frozen. She thought about a man who walked 4 meters over and over in the dark because the room was not big enough for what he was carrying, and the only thing he could do was keep moving. She thought, I know that. And then, past that, past all the careful management and the reasonable frameworks, I see you and you see me and neither of us is ready and both of us know it and I do not know what that means yet. She sat with that. The rain continued against the window. She was still sitting there when the light went, and she did not turn on the lamp, and she did not move. She sat in the darkening room and felt the house around her, and thought about all the rooms in it that had held other people's feelings without comment. One more, she thought, one more. She would sit here with hers. She got up eventually and turned on the lamp and went back to her room and made tea and thought about nothing else that evening, nothing at all. She slept before the pacing started. She did not hear it. In the morning, Hal left after breakfast. He shook her hand in the hall and said it had been a pleasure, directly and without ceremony, and she said the same. Cade stood a little behind his brother, and when Hal's car had gone down the drive, he turned back toward the house and passed her in the hall without speaking, which was normal, which was his default, which she had catalogued thoroughly enough by now to be certain was not personal. She went to work. The house was itself again. Or perhaps, she thought, it was slightly more than it had been. Some doors, once opened, did not fully close. The day went on. The Monday came. The corridors were the same corridors, and the schedule was the same schedule, and the work was the work, and she moved through all of it with the focused attention she brought to everything, and underneath it, steady and present, the thing that Hal had put into words that she had already been feeling. The deliberate part was not fully in charge. She thought about that as she cleaned the study on Wednesday. She thought about what happened when the deliberate part stood down. She thought about what she would do with the space that left. She cleaned the study in 34 minutes, which was her fastest time. She stood in the corridor afterward and thought, all right. She did not know what all right meant yet. She was not going to know for a while. But she was standing in the corridor and the house was around her and it was hers, in the way places became yours when you had put enough work into them. And she thought, all right, this is where I am, and I am going to stay here, and I am going to let whatever happens next happen. She went on with the day. She was very good at going on with the day. She was also, she thought, getting better at letting the day contain more than just the work. That was new. She was going to keep it. Wednesday afternoon she did a thing she had not done since arriving. She sat on the front steps of the house, just outside the main door, and looked at the gate she had walked through 5 weeks ago with a cardboard box under her arm. The gate looked exactly the same. Iron, tall, standing open the way it stood most days. She sat and looked at it and thought about the person who had walked through it. She had been running, not literally, or not only. She had been moving with the specific urgency of someone who had been in one situation too long, and had finally made the decision to be somewhere else, and was moving before she could undecide. She had walked through that gate and looked at the house and registered it the way she registered things she was going to live in, practically, without romance, looking for function rather than feeling. She had not expected to feel anything about this place. She had been completely wrong. She thought about the zipper pouch in the drawer, she thought about the unsent letters, she thought about her room, which was small, and had a window that looked out over a garden that had the good bones of something someone had once cared about, and which felt, in a way that crept up on her without announcing itself, like hers. She thought about the key ring with 5 keys, each one she could identify by touch in her pocket without looking. She thought about the tea tin in the pantry, and the creak of the 3rd stair, and the east wing door in the wind. She thought about the sound above her ceiling. She sat on the steps and felt, for the first time since arriving, the full weight of where she had ended up. Not heavy, just substantial. The way good things were substantial. The way something that mattered sat differently in you than something that didn't. A crow landed on the gravel near her feet and looked at her. She looked back. The crow decided she was not interesting and flew away. She almost laughed. She thought, even the birds here are the same. She thought, you chose well. She had not thought that before. She had thought, this is fine. This will work. This is enough for now. But she had not thought chose well, had not let herself get to chose well, because chose well meant she had arrived somewhere intentional, somewhere she was not just surviving but building. She sat on the steps and let herself have the word. Well, you chose well. She got up. She went back inside. She had the afternoon schedule to get to and it would not do itself. She passed Mr. Aldred in the hall and he asked if she needed anything and she said no, thank you, and she meant it cleanly and without reservation. She went to work. In the corridor near the study she slowed without planning to. The door was closed, the light under it was on. She could hear nothing. She stood for a moment in the way she had started to stand in certain places in this house, not because she was going to do anything, just because the standing itself was a kind of acknowledgement. She had been looking at a locked room for 5 weeks. She had not stopped being curious about it. She went on. She cleaned the 2nd floor bathrooms and the guest room linen and the east wing corridor. She noted the window latch was still holding. She logged it. She went to dinner and ate and said goodnight and went to her room. She took out the separate letter, the one she had been adding to, the right place, slightly beyond what you're ready for. She looked at it. She took out the pen. She wrote, I think I chose well. I think that more than I thought I would. She put the pen down. She put the letter back. She turned off the light. The pacing started at 2:14, 45 minutes. Then it stopped. In the silence afterward, she lay and thought about things that could change without announcement, in increments, the way light changed, the way water found its way through. She thought about all the careful, patient, methodical work of staying somewhere long enough for the place to know you. She thought about staying. She was good at leaving. She had proved that. She was fast and practical and clean about it. She was trying to learn a different thing. She thought, I'm learning. She thought, I'm here. She closed her eyes. The house was around her. All that stone. All those walls that had held so much for so long. Steadily. Without drama. Just holding. She thought, me too. She slept. Thursday came with a particular kind of cold that had finality in it. Not the uncertain cold of October that might lift at midday, but November cold. The kind that had committed. She wore an extra layer and worked in it without complaint, and by mid-morning had forgotten the cold entirely, because the work had its own warmth. She was in the east corridor, replacing the liner in the wastepaper basket near the window, when the study door opened. She did not startle. She had stopped startling at that door. He came out with something in his hand, papers, and he was looking at them as he walked, and then he looked up and saw her. They were about 4 meters apart. She thought, 4 meters. That is the length of a room that does not resolve. She did not say this. I need to move the Wednesday cleaning schedule, he said. I have something at 10 next week. Of course, she said. I can do Thursday. Same time. He nodded. He looked back at the papers. Then he looked back at her. You've been here 5 weeks, he said. Nearly 6, she said. A pause. Not an awkward one. A considering one. Is it working? He said. She thought about the question. She thought about what he was asking and what she was going to say and how much to say. Yes, she said. It's working well. Something in his face. The edge of something. Good, he said. The airing cupboard shelf needs attention, she said, because that was where she took refuge when the alternative was the kind of statement she was not sure she was ready to make. The bracket on the lower left has started pulling away from the wall. He looked at her. Longer than the practical information required. I'll tell Mr. Aldred, he said. Thank you, she said. He went back in. The door closed. She stood in the corridor for a moment with the wastepaper bin in her hands. She thought, he asked if it was working. She thought he was not asking about the job. She put the bin down, she straightened the liner, she moved on. The rest of Thursday was the kind of productive that left you satisfied at the end of it, not from one particular thing but from the accumulation. A good day's work, everything attended to, the place a little better than it had been. She ate her dinner and was almost entirely present during it. Pip had made something involving cheese and pastry that was better than it had any right to be. Owen ate 2 helpings without acknowledging that he had done so. Wren said that was a lot of pastry. Owen said nothing. Mr. Aldred drank his tea with an expression of mild contentment. Lyra sat in the middle of all of it and thought, this is also a thing that has been built here. Not the house. This, 6 people at a table. The ordinary business of an evening. The small frictions and the easy silences and the kind of familiarity that accumulated from sharing space. She thought about the person who was not at the table. She thought about whether that was something that would change. She did not know. She finished her dinner. She said goodnight. She went to her room. She sat at her desk and opened the drawer and looked at the pile of unsent letters, the separate one sitting beside it. She thought, 5.5 weeks. She thought, I came here with a box and a plan and very little else. She thought, look at what else there is now. She closed the drawer. She went to sleep. The pacing that night started at 2:06 and lasted 38 minutes, which was the shortest she had logged. She lay in the dark and noted the duration. 38 minutes. Something was changing. She did not know yet what it was changing into. She thought, I will find out. She was not afraid of finding out. That, she thought, was perhaps the most important thing she had learned in the 5.5 weeks since she walked through the iron gate with her box. She was not afraid. She closed her eyes. She slept. Friday she found him in the kitchen again at 6 in the morning. She had started expecting this without consciously noticing that she had started expecting it. He was there more mornings than not now, in the early hour before the house properly woke, and she had quietly adjusted her own morning routine to match, not to be there at the same time, just to not be surprised when he was. He was looking out the window at the east garden when she came in. He had his coffee already. She made her tea. They stood in the kitchen, and the silence was the comfortable kind, not empty, but resting. Hal called last night, he said. She waited. He said the visit was good. A pause. He said you were good company. She turned this over. I spoke to him for about 15 minutes, she said. In the library. That's long for Hal, he said. He usually makes a decision about someone in 3. She thought about what decision Hal had made. She thought about the cage built when you're afraid, never reviewed when the fear changes. And she thought about not saying any of that. He's perceptive, she said. Annoyingly so, he said. And then the thing happened that had happened through the wall at dinner. The brief low sound of a laugh. But this time she was in the room for it, 4 feet away with her mug of tea. She did not react. She absorbed it. He turned back to the window. The sound had surprised him, she could tell. He had not expected it. She thought, that is what it looks like when a habit you lost starts to come back, startled by its own return. The bracket in the airing cupboard, she said, because she needed something practical in her hands. Mr. Aldred is looking at it today. Good, he said. I've logged all the repairs from this week, she said. The report is on the kitchen table. Thank you. She finished her tea. She put the mug in the sink. She looked out the window for a moment at the garden, which was frost-white and still. I'm going to begin the east rooms, she said. Of course, he said. She left. She was in the east corridor before she let herself acknowledge what had happened in the kitchen. The laugh. She had been in the room for it. She had heard it at close range. It was the same sound she had heard through the wall on the night of Hal's visit, brief and surprised and real. She pressed her hands flat against her sides and walked to the end of the corridor and stood at the window for a moment. She thought, something is different than it was a week ago. She thought, something is different than it was 3 days ago. She thought, I am going to be very careful not to ruin it. She turned back to the day. She worked through the morning without thinking about anything except the morning. By the time she had finished the east rooms and moved to the main floor corridor, it was nearly 10, and the house had the mid-morning quality she had come to like, the quality of a place that was fully occupied and functional, all its people doing their work. She was one of them. She was part of this. She had not expected to be part of anything when she walked off that bus. She thought, here. She thought, you chose well. She kept walking. The day went on. She let it. The Monday that decided things was not a dramatic Monday. Lyra would have preferred a dramatic Monday. A dramatic Monday would have felt like something happening to her, something she could respond to and manage. What she got instead was 3 days of accumulated momentum arriving at a very ordinary early evening, and nothing dramatic about any of it. She had done her work. She had eaten her meals. She had sat in the library 2 evenings and read about landscape design and thought about other things. She had not seen much of Cade. He had been, according to Mr. Aldred, in a period of meetings related to estate management, something involving land surveys and adjacent properties, which Mr. Aldred mentioned not as gossip, but as explanation for why the study was going to require a revised cleaning schedule that week. She had adjusted her routine accordingly and done the study on a different day and found it darker than usual when she worked in it, the blinds half drawn against the November glare, the desk more scattered with papers than she had ever seen it. She had cleaned around it all without moving anything. On Monday she had finished her afternoon schedule and returned her supplies to the cleaning room and gone back toward the east wing to change. She was going past the main hallway when she heard Mr. Aldred's voice, and then another voice, and she had slowed automatically, not to listen, just to clear the space before someone came through the door. But the voice she heard with Mr. Aldred's was not Cade's. It was a voice she did not recognize, not one of the staff. Male, slightly too confident in the way of someone who had come somewhere with a specific intention. She heard her own name. Not from Mr. Aldred, from the stranger. She stopped moving entirely. She heard Mr. Aldred say, evenly, that he would check whether that was possible. She heard the stranger say that he had come a long way and that it was important. She heard something in the tone that she recognized from a particular distance, the particular quality of someone who used the word important as a tool rather than a description. She stood in the hall outside the door and felt something happen in her chest. Not panic. She had passed through panic with this particular category of problem and come out the other side into something older and colder and more functional. What happened was the body closing down around the essential things, the way it did when it knew something was coming and had decided to be ready. She heard Mr. Aldred say, "If you will wait here." She stepped into the alcove near the side window before the hallway door opened. She stood in it and breathed. She did not need to see him. She knew the voice. She knew it with the specific, stomach-dropping recognition of someone who had believed, for 4 months, that they had gotten far enough away. Her name, in that voice. She pressed her back against the wall of the alcove and thought with quick, methodical clarity about what the options were. She could go out the side entrance. She could go upstairs. She could wait until Mr. Aldred came back and intercept him before he reported back to whoever was in the hallway. She could stay here and collect herself and decide. She stayed. Mr. Aldred's footsteps came back. She heard him cross the main hall. She heard him say to the stranger that Miss Voss was not available to receive visitors and that the estate had a policy regarding unannounced personal visits to staff. She heard him say it in the tone he reserved for situations that required him to be a wall, polite, immovable, the verbal equivalent of a closed gate. She heard the stranger's voice rise slightly, not shouting, the controlled version of pushing. She heard Mr. Aldred not move. And then she heard a third voice, quiet, flat, coming from somewhere further in the house and then closer. Is there a problem? Not a question. She knew that voice. There was a pause in the hallway. A few words she could not fully make out. Then Cade's voice again, lower this time, and therefore less audible but entirely clear in tone, the kind of tone that did not leave room for disagreement. She heard the front door. Silence. She stayed in the alcove for a moment. Then she stepped out. The hallway was empty except for Mr. Aldred, who was standing near the front door with his expression set in the professional neutral that meant something had just required effort and he was not going to show how much. He turned when he heard her. She said, "I heard." He said, "It has been handled. The person has left the property." She said, "Was it someone from Calder?" A brief pause. He said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you, Mr. Aldred." He said, "Of course, Miss Voss." She went upstairs. She made it to her room and closed the door and sat on the edge of her bed and was very still for a moment, not because she was about to fall apart, but because falling apart was adjacent to the feeling, and she needed to let the feeling be what it was without that. She pressed her hands together in her lap. She breathed. He had followed her here. 4 months was not far enough. Mr. Aldred had handled it. Cade had handled it. They had not asked. She held that last part carefully. There was a knock at her door. Soft, not urgent. She said yes. The door opened a crack. It was not Mr. Aldred, and it was not Wren. It was Cade. She looked at him. He looked at her. He did not come into the room. He stood in the doorway, standing still and deliberate with his hands at his sides and his expression doing the thing it did where it was serious without announcing itself. "You're all right," he said. Another not question. "Yes," she said. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she could say, and all the things she had never said, and the drawer full of letters that said them in the dark where no one else could see. "His name is Graham Ford," she said. "He's from my last city. We had a situation that ended badly. I thought I had put enough distance between myself and it." She did not say anything else. He did not ask anything else. He stood in the doorway and looked at her and said, "He won't be back." Not a promise. A statement, the specific kind that did not need clarification about how it would be kept. She felt something happen in the back of her throat. She pushed it down with the practice of years. "I know," she said. He nodded. He was about to leave, and then he did not. He stood in the doorway for another moment with his hand on the frame, and she was aware of how long this was going on, and she was also aware that she was not doing anything to end it. "I should have knocked," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The first time," he said. "The door. I should have knocked." She looked at him for a moment. "That was weeks ago," she said. "I know," he said. She was quiet. "You also should have spoken," she said, "when you were in the doorway." Something in his expression that was not quite a reaction. "I know that too," he said. "You said it was your default," she said. "I said quiet was my default," he said. "That's true. It's not always an excuse." She looked at him. He looked at her. The doorway between them was the same architecture it always was, and also completely different in this moment. "Graham Ford," she said. "The situation, I am not going to tell you what it was." "You don't have to," he said. "But I'm also not going to say it was nothing," she said. "Because it was not nothing. It was something that happened, and I had to make a decision about it. And the decision was to leave." He was very still, listening. "And I chose here," she said. "I know that's not the full picture, but that is the part of it that matters." She stopped. He stood in the doorway. Then he said, "You chose well." She did not know what to do with that. She looked at the window. "I'm going to take the next hour," she said, "and then I'll be fine." "Of course," he said. He left. He pulled the door nearly closed behind him, not latched, just to give her the room. She sat on the edge of the bed and let an hour go by. When it had, she washed her face. She changed her shirt. She went down to the kitchen and made tea, and stood at the window with it, and watched the dark in the garden. She heard him come into the kitchen behind her. She heard him make coffee. She heard him stay. She did not say anything, and he did not say anything, and they stood in the kitchen in the quiet, and drank their separate hot drinks, and the quiet was not the quiet of avoidance. It was the quiet of two people who had decided, each on their own and without discussion, that they did not need words for this particular moment. They stayed for a little while. Then she put her mug down and said good night and went up. In her room she opened the desk drawer. She took out the separate letter, the one that said the right place was slightly beyond what she was ready for, with all the lines she had added. She looked at it. She found a pen. She added, "Today he said you chose well." She put the pen down. She looked at what she had written. She put the letter back. She turned off the light. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. At 2:05, the pacing started. 40 minutes. Then silence, shorter than it had ever been. She lay in the silence and thought about shorter. She thought about things that could change without announcement, in increments, the way light changed, the way water found its way through. She slept. The next morning she came down early again, earlier than usual. The house was still dim, the kitchen not yet fully light, and she stood at the window and waited for the kettle and thought about the evening before, and what had been said, and what had not been said. She thought about, "You chose well." She thought about the way he had said it, not gently, not warmly in any performed sense, just directly, in the way he said most things, as though the statement were simply true and he was reporting it rather than offering it, as though her presence here were an established fact rather than a courtesy. She thought, that is the highest version of a compliment from this particular person. She thought, I know that. The kettle finished. She poured her tea. She did not hear him come in. She registered his presence the way she always registered it, not from sound exactly, but from a change in the quality of the air, the way a room felt different when another person entered it, and she turned, and he was there. He looked tired, not in a way he was showing, in a way she had learned to see. She said nothing about it. There's tea if you want it, she said. The kettle's still hot. He moved to the counter. He did not take tea. He made coffee, as always. She watched him do it. The same unhurried routine, the same specific sequence he always used. She thought, this is what ordinary looks like when you have been inside it long enough. Mr. Aldred will call the gate company, he said, to discuss the access log, so we know going forward who comes in. Thank you, she said. It's an estate matter, he said, not a particular one. She understood what he meant. He was not making it larger than it needed to be. He was not making her smaller than she was. He was putting the practical measure in place and framing it as what it was, just an estate matter, so she did not have to carry additional weight on top of the weight she was already carrying. She thought, this is also a very specific form of consideration. I appreciate it, she said. He poured his coffee. He did not leave immediately. He stood at the counter, and she stood at the window, and the early morning was around them, and the garden outside was getting its light back slowly, the frost on the grass turning from gray to white as the sky came up. You've been here 6 weeks, he said. Nearly 7, she said. Is it still working? He said. She thought about the question. She thought about the fact that he was asking it again, that he had asked it last week too, that he appeared to be checking something with these regular quiet inquiries. Yes, she said, more than it was. A pause. Good, he said. She looked at the garden. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about how much of it was something she could actually say, and how much was something that needed more time. I'm not going anywhere, she said. She said it simply, not as reassurance, as information, the same way he stated things. He looked at her, the direct, unhurried look. He held it for a moment. I know, he said. She turned back to the window. The frost was going now, the grass coming through beneath it, the garden beginning its morning. Owen was at the far end, already there, already working. She finished her tea. She rinsed the mug. She went to work. The rest of the week settled into something slightly different than the weeks before it. Not dramatically. Nothing in this house was dramatic. But the texture had changed in the small, accumulative way of things that had moved from one state to another without announcement. She noticed it in the mornings, in the way the kitchen felt at 6 when they were both in it, less effortful, less managed on both sides. There was still the silence. She did not expect that to change, but the silence had a different quality. The silence of 2 people who had been honest with each other once, and were deciding what to do with the honesty. She noticed it in the study on Wednesday, when she cleaned and found the desk slightly more organized than usual, as though someone had thought about the fact that she would be in there, and had made the work easier. She noticed it on Thursday when she passed him in the corridor and he said, without stopping, Owen thinks the east wall needs repointing before spring, and she said, I'll add it to the maintenance log, and he said, thank you, and kept walking. And the whole exchange had the quality of people who were simply in a place together, doing the work of it together, without performance. She noticed it most clearly on Friday evening when she went to the library and found him there. He was not there often in the evenings. He worked late and came to the library sometimes, but usually after she had gone. She had not shared the library with him since the Sunday of the apology. He looked up when she came in. She looked at him. She held her book. I can come back, she said. No, he said. It's fine. She sat in her chair. He was in a chair on the other side of the fireplace. They were perhaps 8 feet apart. She opened her book. He was looking at papers, not a book, something to do with work. They were in the room together. Neither of them spoke. The fire was not lit, and the lamps were on, and outside the window the November evening was fully dark, and she read about landscape design and did not think about anything except the reading, and the room was quiet and warm and occupied. After an hour she closed her book and stood. Good night, Ilov, she said. He looked up, something on his face, the edge of the thing that had been on his face in the kitchen on the Monday, in the doorway, in all the moments she had started to keep track of. Good night, he said. She went to her room. She sat on the bed and held the closed book and thought, that is the library the way it is supposed to be. Occupied, used, 2 people in it doing their separate things without needing to make anything of the sharing. She thought, I want more evenings like that. she thought. I think I might get them. She put the book on the windowsill with the others. She turned off the light. The pacing that night lasted 27 minutes, the shortest yet. She lay in the dark and heard it end and thought, yes, something is changing. She was not afraid of it. She was, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely looking forward to finding out what it was becoming. She slept. Saturday morning she put on her coat and walked to the village, not because she needed anything, because she wanted the walk, the cold air, the brief useful feeling of doing a task that had a clear end to it. She bought tea from the shop and a small notebook she did not particularly need, and a piece of shortbread from the cafe. She sat at the window table she always used and drank a coffee and looked out at the street. She thought about being here 6 weeks ago. She had been a different version of herself. Not better or worse, just different, less settled, less sure of where she had landed. She was sure now. She was sure in the way she was sure of things when they had stopped being decisions and had become simply facts, the way you stopped deciding to be in a place and started just being in it. She was in this house. She was part of its daily life. She had a key ring with 5 keys she could find by feel, and a favorite chair in the library, and a routine she had built from the ground up with her own hands and attention and care. She was not running. She was here. She finished her coffee and walked back in the cold, bright air of a November morning and went through the iron gate and across the gravel and in through the side door and up to her room. She stood at the window and looked at the garden. She thought about the separate letter in the drawer, the one with all the additions. The right place. So did I. You chose well. Today he said you chose well. I think I chose well. She thought about what she wanted to add to it next. She thought for a while. Then she went to the desk and took out the pen and found the letter. She wrote, I don't think I'm running anymore. She put the pen down. She looked at it. She folded the letter and put it back. She went to get ready for the afternoon. In the corridor on her way to the linen room, she passed him going in the other direction. He stopped. She stopped. 4 meters between them. The same 4 meters, the same corridor. He said, the gate log came back this morning. There is no record of that person having been here before. She nodded. First visit, she said. Last one, he said. She believed him without needing to hear how. She had learned, in 7 weeks, that when he stated something without qualification, he meant it to exactly the extent it was stated. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He went past her. She stood in the corridor for a moment. She thought, last one. She thought, yes. She thought, I am very sure now. She went to get the linens. 3 days after Graham Ford had been turned away from the gate, Cade asked her to come to his study. Not at her cleaning time, not in passing. He knocked on the door of the room she was working in on Wednesday morning and said, when she opened it, that he wanted to speak with her when she had time, and that it was not urgent, and she could come whenever was convenient. He was formal about it, the way he was formal about things that mattered to him. Not cold, just careful, in the way of someone who had decided to do something and did not want to handle it badly. She said she could come at noon. He said noon was fine. She spent the rest of the morning working at her usual pace. She did not overthink the meeting. She had spent enough time cataloging the patterns of this house and this person to have a reasonably accurate sense of what was likely, and what was likely was that he was going to say something about the Ford situation, or something about the gate protocol, or something else practical that required a direct conversation rather than a note. That was what was likely. She went to the study at noon. He was behind the desk. He gestured to the chair across from it, which she had never sat in before. She sat. She looked at the photograph turned toward the chair. She looked at him. He said, I want to be honest with you about something. She said, all right. He looked at his desk, not at her, at the desk. A man gathering a sentence from the materials available. He said, when you arrived, I thought the arrangement was practical, efficient. I was not expecting to notice you particularly. She did not respond. He said, I noticed you from approximately the end of the first week. She was quiet. Not in a way I was comfortable with, he said. I want to be clear about that. I am not. This is not a situation I would have arranged. I'm not particularly good at this. At what? She said. She knew what he meant. She wanted him to say it. He looked up. He met her eyes. At anything that involves being less than careful, he said. I've been careful for 2 years. It functions. It's what I have, and I know how to run it. I know, she said. I can see it. You can, he said. You see quite a lot. It's not the same as understanding it all, she said. I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. I tried to have you removed. She held very still. I remember, she said. I had a reason, he said. That I didn't explain. She waited. The reason, he said slowly, was that I was aware of you in a way that was inconvenient, and I thought removing the inconvenience would address the problem. Did you think it would work? She said. I thought it was the practical option, he said. That's not the same thing, she said. No, he said, it isn't. They looked at each other across the desk. The photograph was between them in its wooden frame, turned toward the chair she was sitting in. I'm not going to tell you that things aren't complicated, he said. I'm not in a position to say that. 2 years isn't a complete reset. Things are still in a state. I'm still in a state. I have a system and it works, and I'm aware that it's also a cage and that the awareness doesn't automatically mean I can open the lock. She thought of Hal. She thought about who had told him that. Did you talk to your brother about this? She said. A very brief pause. He talked at me, he said. I listened. She almost smiled. She held it. He's perceptive, she said. Annoyingly, he said. And then something happened at the corner of his expression, the cousin of the laugh she had heard through the wall. Brief and startled and real. She felt it land somewhere in her chest. I'm also complicated, she said. I want to say that. I'm not presenting myself as a simple option. I came here running from something, and I've been here 7 weeks and I'm still not entirely sure what I am in relation to what I'm running from. I have my own cage. I'm also aware of it. He was listening. He was very good at listening. She had known that for a while, but it was specific in this context, specific and deliberate. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I want to make that clear. I know, he said. You're not the kind of person who asks for things. No, she said, I'm not. Neither am I, he said. A pause. We're both very sensible people, she said, who are very bad at certain things. Something moved in his face. Not the shadow of a reaction this time. The reaction itself. Small, controlled, but actually there. That's accurate, he said. She looked at the photograph. She looked at it without trying to hide that she was looking. She was important, she said. Not a question. He followed her gaze. Yes, he said. I'm not trying to compete with a memory, she said carefully. I don't think it works like that. It doesn't, he said quietly. But I understand that absence has a shape, she said. That it takes up space. And I'm not asking you to pretend it doesn't. He was looking at her now, not at the desk, not at the photograph, at her. I'm telling you, she said, because you told me that you noticed me, and that it was inconvenient, and that you tried to fix the inconvenience by removing it. And I think you deserve to know that I noticed you too, and that it has also been inconvenient, and that removing myself has not once felt like an option. The room was very quiet. She could hear the wind outside. She could hear the old heating in the walls. She could hear, very faintly, the sound of the house going about its business below them. He said, "What do you want to do with it?" She said, "I don't know yet. I think we don't know yet. I think that's honest." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What I know is that I don't want you to leave." She heard that. She sat with it. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I know," he said. "That's..." He stopped, reorganized. "That's something." "Yes," she said, "it is." They sat in the study with the photograph on the desk and the November light coming through the windows and all the things that were still in motion between them. Unresolved, undemanding, just present. She thought about pacing above her ceiling. She thought about 10 seconds in a doorway. She thought about quiet that was not empty. She thought, something is beginning. Not ending. Not resolving. Beginning. She thought about how beginnings were the hardest thing for her, not because she did not want them, but because she had always been better at going than staying, and staying was what beginnings required. She was going to stay. She was, in fact, already staying. She had been staying since she walked through that iron gate with a cardboard box under her arm, and looked up at a house that was thinking. She had stayed through the wrong doors and the 10 seconds and the lamplit mornings and the 2 a.m. footsteps and the letter she would never send and the one that said so did I and the one that said you chose well. She was still here. She looked at him. He was still here too. "All right," she said. "Not to any particular thing. To all of it." He looked at her, and for a moment his face did not do any of its careful management. It just was. A face she had learned in increments over 7 weeks, in corridors and kitchens and library evenings and one very specific Tuesday and one Wednesday morning. A face that was, she thought, possibly beginning to trust being seen. She stood up, she straightened her clothes. She said she had the afternoon schedule to get to. He said of course. She went to the door. At the door she stopped. She had not planned this. She turned. The window in the east wing linen closet, she said. The latch needs replacing, not just tightening. I'll have it sorted by Friday. He looked at her. Thank you, he said. Of course, she said. She went back to work. She cleaned the east wing bathroom and the corridor and the linen closet, and she made a note about the window latch. She ate dinner with the others. She listened to Owen describe the state of the rose bed along the east wall and whether it was salvageable for spring. She said goodnight to everyone in turn. She went to her room. She opened the desk drawer. She took out the separate letter, the one with all the additions, and she held it. She did not read it. She just held it. Then she put it back. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark. The house was quiet. The pacing did not start at 2, or at 2:30, or at 3. She lay awake until 3:15, and then she thought, something has changed. She could not know what. She could not know if it was this day, this conversation, or if it was something that had been building for weeks and had arrived without announcing itself. But the house above her was quiet. She lay in that quiet for a long time. She thought about all the ways things could change slowly and then seem, from a distance, like they had changed in an instant. All the invisible accumulation, all the daily doing and staying and choosing, and the weight of it pressing gradually on whatever needed to give until it gave. She thought about herself. She thought about him. She closed her eyes. She slept. In the morning she woke before 5. She did not know why. She lay for a moment in the dark and listened to the house, the radiator, the wind, the particular early silence of a building that had not yet started its day. She was not afraid. She was not anxious. She recognized, all right. Not healed, not fixed, not resolved, just, at this moment, in this room, in this house, she was all right. She thought about that. Then she got up. She made tea. She stood at the window while the tea brewed and watched the dark in the garden and thought about what it meant to be a person who had left a lot of places and had now arrived in one that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like it might be the one she was supposed to arrive at. She thought, I don't know how to stay. She thought, I'm going to learn. The tea was ready. She poured it. She took it to the window and stood there. She thought about the cardboard box she had carried off the bus on a cold October afternoon, the one with the chipped mug and the paperback books and the blanket the color of old mustard, and how all of it was now organized into the rooms of this house in the quiet, practical way she organized everything, and how the room had stopped feeling temporary months ago without her noticing exactly when. She thought about Ren saying, some places fit the shape of you faster than others. She thought, yes. She drank her tea. She put on her clothes. She went down to the kitchen, and the kitchen was empty, and she put the kettle on again because the tea she had had upstairs had not been enough, and she stood at the window and watched the garden come back from the dark, the frost on the grass, the slow return of color, the sound of the first birds. She heard him come in at 6:03. She did not turn around. She heard him cross to the counter. She heard the coffee tin. She heard the kettle, which was still hot. She heard him stop. She looked at the window. She could see his reflection in the dark glass, the outline of him, standing at the counter, looking at her back. She thought about all the mornings they had been in this kitchen separately and together, and all the careful things they had both not done with those mornings. She turned around. He was looking at her, in the ordinary light of the kitchen at 6 in the morning with his coffee not yet made and his hair still carrying the evidence of not enough sleep, and he was looking at her the way she had come to know was his actual look, the one that was not performing anything. She thought, 10 seconds is a long time. She thought, I have been counting them for weeks. She thought, I am done counting. She picked up her tea. She moved to the table and sat down, which was not what either of them usually did in the mornings. He stood at the counter for a moment. Then he finished making the coffee. Then he came and sat across from her. They did not say anything. Outside the window, the garden was getting lighter. Inside the kitchen, the coffee cooled to a drinkable temperature, and they sat across from each other, and it was just that. 2 people at an early morning table, the entire history of the last 7 weeks in the air, and all the things still ahead of them that neither of them could see yet. She thought, here. This is here. She looked at him across the table, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything, and neither of them needed to. And outside, the November morning was beginning in its slow, undramatic way, and the house was waking up, and somewhere in the east wing a radiator was ticking steadily, and the world was still there, and so were they. She thought, all right. Both of them. For the first time. All right. She drank her tea. He drank his coffee. The kitchen brightened by degrees as the morning came on, and neither of them moved to start the day, not yet, not for these few minutes, just sat in the ordinary extraordinary fact of being two people who had finally stopped managing the space between them, and were simply, quietly, in it. Wren came in at 6:30 and looked at them, and did not say anything, and went to make her own tea, and the morning began, and the day began, and the house took up its daily life around them, in its calm and unremarkable way. And Lyra sat at the kitchen table and thought, this is what staying looks like. Not the dramatic version. Not the version with a name and a plan. Just this. Two people and a table and a morning. Just this. She picked up her mug. She went to work. The week after the study conversation was the quietest Lyra had known since arriving. Quiet in a specific way. The way a space went quiet after a pressure had been released. Not empty, just breathed out. She cleaned her rooms and did her schedule and noted the things that needed noting. She replaced the window latch in the East Wing linen closet on Thursday as she had said she would. She logged it. She showed the repaired latch to Mr. Aldred when he passed, not because she needed to, but because thoroughness was how she expressed the things she did not have words for. On Thursday afternoon she was in the library returning a book when she noticed something she had not noticed before. There was a second chair at the fireplace that had not been there at the start. Not a grand addition. Just a chair that had been moved from another area of the room and placed at an angle that made the seating more like a conversation than an audience. She stood and looked at the two chairs. She thought about who had moved it. She thought, things happen in small gestures. That is always how they happen, the real ones. She put her book on the shelf. She ran her finger along the spine to make sure it was sitting correctly. Then she went back to work. On Friday evening she went to the library at her usual time and sat in her usual chair. And he was there again, in the chair across from her, and they were in the room in the way they had been on that first Friday, except that the chair was positioned differently now, and the angle of it meant they were facing each other rather than parallel. She noticed this. She thought he had probably noticed it too. Neither of them mentioned it. She read for an hour. He read for about 40 minutes and then stopped reading and sat looking at the fire, which was lit tonight for the first time, a small fire, just enough to take the chill from the room. The firelight on his face. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the fire. She thought, I am in the right place. I am not afraid of what comes next. I have chosen to be here. She went back to her book and read for another 20 minutes, and when she stood to leave, he looked up and she said good night, and he said good night, and she walked to the door and then stopped. She turned. The bracket on the far left shelf, she said. I checked it today. Still holding. He looked at her. A full look. The one that did not do the usual managing. I know, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, good night. And she went. In her room she sat on the bed and thought about all the things that were still unfinished between them, and all the things that had been finished without announcement, and all the things that were beginning. She thought, this is the right order. Not fast, not dramatic. Just true, just real. Just the slow-built thing that arrived when you had been honest with each other enough times that honesty became the only language available. She lay back. She looked at the ceiling. The pacing did not start that night. She lay in the silence and it stayed silent, and she thought, yes, yes. She closed her eyes. She was asleep before 10, which was the earliest she had been asleep in months, and the sleep was the kind she had been chasing since she stepped off the bus with her cardboard box. The deep, unheld, genuinely rested kind. She slept through the night. In the morning she was already at the kitchen window when he came in, already making tea, and he came to the counter and made his coffee and stood beside her while it brewed, and she did not move away, and he did not either, and they stood shoulder close in the kitchen while the morning came on outside, and it was just two people standing in a kitchen, and it was also the first thing, and they both knew it was the first thing, and neither of them said so, because neither of them needed to. She poured her tea. He poured his coffee. They went to work. The morning of the 8th week began like the others. Her alarm did not go off because she had woken before it, lying in the dark with the particular clarity of someone whose sleep had been clean. She lay for a moment and listened to the house, all its settled sounds, the radiator, the creak of the old building adjusting to the morning, the sound of the wind in the East Wing gap, and felt the familiar weight of a place that had become hers. She got up. She made tea. She stood at the window. The garden outside was doing the thing November gardens did, not beautiful but not desolate, just present. The bare forms of things that would be something else in spring. The good bones of a space that someone had cared about, and that would be cared about again. Owen was already at the far end near the stone wall, a figure in the half-light, unhurried. She stood with her tea and thought about the fact that she knew all of this by heart now. The timing of Owen's appearances. The specific light of this hour in this direction. The sound of the heating in the walls versus the sound of it in the pipes. All the accumulated knowledge of a place that was no longer new. She thought, I live here. Not I work here. Not I'm staying here for now. I live here. She drank her tea and went down to the kitchen. He was there. This was not unusual. She had adjusted her understanding of what usual meant. He was in the kitchen at this hour most mornings now, and she was in the kitchen at this hour most mornings now, and the overlap was no longer a coincidence. Either of them was pretending was accidental. He had the coffee already. He was at the window when she came in, the way she was at the window, and he turned when he heard her and did not say anything. She went to the counter. She put the kettle on. She stood beside him at the window. Outside, Owen had moved to the shed at the garden's edge and was going in, the door swinging behind him, unhurried. He's been here 8 years, Cade said. I didn't know that, she said. He was here before. He stopped. A brief, deliberate stop. Then, he has been here longer than anything else. She did not comment on the stop. She had learned not to comment on the stops. They were where he organized things, the small pauses before sentences that required more than their words. He told me once, Cade said, that the best thing about this work was that it didn't ask you to explain yourself. You just did it, and the doing was enough. She thought about that. He's right, she said. I thought so too. A pause. I've thought about it a lot in the last 2 years. She was quiet. She let the statement be what it was. I want to say something, he said. All right, she said. He was still looking out the window, not at her. At the garden, at the shed where Owen had disappeared, at the bare trees along the east wall. I know what happened in the study last week, he said. I know what I said, and what you said, and I don't want either of us to be uncertain about what it was. She waited. I've been uncertain about a lot of things, he said, for a long time. I've built a great deal around the uncertainty to keep it from costing me things. And it has worked, and it has also cost me things anyway, in different ways. She thought about a cage built when you're afraid. She thought about her own drawer full of letters. She thought, yes. I'm aware of you, he said. I have been since the first week. Not in a way I planned or wanted at first, but in a way I stopped being able to pretend was going to simplify itself. I stopped pretending about 3 weeks ago. About the same time for me, she said. He turned. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to do anything about it, she said. I told you that in the study. I meant it. I know you meant it, he said. That's not what I'm building to. She waited. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried look that was simply his face doing its default thing, taking in rather than performing, present in the specific way of someone who had decided to be present and was doing it completely. I'm telling you, he said, that I am aware of you and that I don't want to manage that anymore. And I am not sure what that means in practice or how it works given everything that is still in a state, and I am not going to pretend I know, but I know that the managing is done. She stood at the window of the kitchen in the early morning of the 8th week and felt something in her chest that was not quite relief and not quite joy, but was somewhere between the two, the feeling of a thing that has been held at a particular tension for a long time, finally being set down. Not resolution, not arrival, just the tension going. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I know, he said. That's not just about the job, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, the morning continued its slow coming on, and inside the kitchen was warm and quiet and smelled of coffee and old wood. She thought, this is the first thing. The first thing, finally. Not dramatic, not declared, just present, between two people who had been circling it since the first week and had finally stopped circling and come to stand in it instead. She picked up her mug. She put it back down. She took one step toward him. Not a large step, just across the kitchen. Just close enough. She said, I came here with a box and a plan and very little idea of what I was building. He said, I know. She said, I think I'm building something now. He said, so am I. She nodded. Once. Slowly. She picked up her mug. She went and sat at the table. After a moment he came and sat across from her. The kitchen was quiet. The morning was happening outside. They were sitting at a table that they had sat at before, and it was different than those times, because they had said the thing, or enough of the thing, and now the table was what it was, a place where two people sat. She drank her tea. He drank his coffee. The rose bed, she said. Owen was talking about it at dinner, whether it was salvageable. It is, he said. It just needs the right attention in spring. I can help with that, she said, when the time comes. He looked at her. Not the full, careful look. Something quieter than that. Something that had dropped the careful. Good, he said. They sat. The morning brightened by degrees, the kitchen filling with thin November light, and Wren came in at 6:30 and put the kettle on and said good morning, and did not make anything of the two of them at the table, which was either politeness or the result of knowing them both well enough to have seen this coming, and Lyra thought it was probably the second. Owen appeared at the back door at 6:45 and said the shed door handle had finally given way, and was there a replacement in the supply room, and Lyra said she would check, and she did, and there was, and she brought it out to him, and he fitted it in 5 minutes and said good, and she said good, and they went back in. The day started, the house started. The schedule on the pantry door said what it always said, the same rooms, the same tasks, the same practical and necessary work of making a place what it was supposed to be. She did her work. She moved through the rooms she knew by heart now, the library with its particular light, the study, which she cleaned on Wednesdays in 34 minutes, the East Wing corridor with its warped window latch, the guest rooms with their tight-cornered beds. She moved through all of it with the easy focus of someone who had been in a place long enough to work without thinking, her hands doing what they had done 100 times while her mind was somewhere else, or nowhere at all, just present, just moving, just here. At noon she came in from the corridor with her supply basket and found a note on the kitchen table in the handwriting that was not Mr. Aldred's. She set down the basket. She looked at the note. It said, "The library. This evening, if you want." She stood and read it twice. Then she folded it. She put it in her coat pocket. She picked up her basket and went on. She thought, yes. She thought, of course yes. She thought, yes. She went through the afternoon like every afternoon, steady and attended to, and by evening she had changed and gone to the library, and he was there, in the chair across from hers, with the fire going, which she had come to think of as his way of saying something without saying it. She sat in her chair. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I used to read in the evenings before," he said. "It was something we did together. I stopped when that stopped." She waited. "I've been starting to again," he said, "in the last few weeks." She thought about the last few Fridays, the shared evenings, the 2 chairs at the fire. "I know," she said. "I want to keep doing it," he said. "So do I," she said. He looked at her for a moment longer, and then looked at his book, and she looked at hers, and they were in the library together in the evening, and it was ordinary, and it was specific, and it was exactly what it was supposed to be. They read. The fire burned steadily, the house was around them, the night was outside, inside was warm and lit and quiet in the particular way of a place where 2 people who have stopped managing the space between them were simply occupying it. She read for an hour. She turned pages and absorbed words and was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely somewhere rather than part somewhere and part somewhere else, part present and part running. She was entirely here. She put her book down eventually and looked at the fire. He looked up. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She stood. She went to the door. At the door she paused. She did not turn. She just said, to the door, "Thank you." A pause. Then, for what? She thought about the 8 weeks, the radiator, the bracket, the kettle on the counter, the coffee tin, the note on the kitchen table, the chair moved to face the fireplace, the study at noon. For not making it complicated, she said, when it could have been. Silence. "It was complicated," he said. "I know," she said, "but you didn't make it small." She went to her room. She sat on her bed. She opened the desk drawer. She took out the separate letter with all its additions. She read it from the beginning for the first time, all the pieces she had added over the weeks. The right place. "So did I. You chose well. I think I chose well. I don't think I'm running anymore." She read it, and she thought, yes, all of that is true. All of that happened. She picked up the pen. She thought for a moment. She wrote, "I stayed, and it was the right thing, and I am going to keep staying." She put the pen down. She looked at the letter. Then she folded it and held it for a moment. She put it back in the drawer. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark. The house was around her, steady and warm. All that stone and old wood and whatever it was that places accumulated when people had lived in them a long time. She thought about tomorrow. The schedule, the rooms, the kitchen in the morning. She thought about the fire in the library and the 2 chairs, and the way he had said, "So am I." She thought, this is what I was building toward, all of it. This. Not the dramatic ending. Not the resolved thing. Just this. A house that was hers. Work that was real. People who had become real to her. And someone across a kitchen table who had said the managing was done. Who had said, "So am I." Just this. She closed her eyes. The house settled around her, all its quiet weight. She slept. No pacing above her ceiling. Just the house. Just the dark. Just the ordinary, extraordinary fact of being somewhere and choosing to stay. She slept, and the night went on. And in the morning she got up and made tea and went to the kitchen. And the kitchen was already warm, and there was someone already there. And she sat down across from him, and neither of them said anything, because they did not need to, because they had said enough, because the saying was done and the being had begun. They sat in the kitchen. The morning came. The estate woke around them. The day started. This was what it was. This was enough. This was everything. The week that followed the library evening was the first week Lyra stopped counting. She had not realized she was counting until she stopped. She had been tracking things without naming the tracking. The pacing above her ceiling and its duration, the frequency of the kitchen mornings, the number of exchanges in corridors versus the number of silences. She had been managing data the way she managed everything, carefully, in case the data showed something she needed to know. The week after the library evening she stopped needing to know, she just lived in it. Monday was cleaning in the East Wing rooms and a conversation with Owen about whether the garden shed needed its roof, looked at this winter, or could wait until spring. She said she would add it to the maintenance log. He said good. They parted ways at the garden door. She thought, this is ordinary. She thought, I have been waiting a long time for ordinary to feel like enough. It felt like enough. It felt like more than enough. Tuesday she replaced a section of grout in the second-floor bathroom that had been on her list since the 3rd week and had kept getting pushed by more urgent things. She did it methodically and well, the way she did everything, and when she was done she cleaned up and checked the result and it was good, and she felt the small, clean satisfaction of a task finished properly. She thought about all the small, clean satisfactions, the bracket, the latch, the drawer handle, the grout, the kind of work that did not announce itself but held things together so that other things could be what they were supposed to be. She thought, I am good at holding things together. She thought, I want to be good at more than holding things together. She thought about the library, about 2 chairs and a fire and the specific quality of the silence that was not avoidance. She thought, I am getting there. Wednesday she cleaned the study at 10. The photograph was on the desk. She looked at it, as she had been looking at it for weeks, directly and without making a thing of it. A woman with a full smile, bright outdoors somewhere. She thought, you are not a problem to be solved. You are a person who was here and is not anymore. You are what happened before the things that are happening now. Both things are true. They do not cancel each other. She finished the study in 32 minutes, her fastest time. She stood in the corridor for a moment. She thought, some things take as long as they take and then they take less time. That is not the same as them mattering less. It is just things finding their right size. She went on. Thursday brought a hard frost and a delivery for the estate that needed signing, and she was the one who happened to be near the front door when it came, so she signed for it and set it on the hall table and wrote a note for Mr. Aldred that it had arrived. Small things, ordinary things, the daily business of a place that was functioning. She moved through all of it with the steady, easy competence she had built over 8 weeks, and she thought, I am part of the functioning. I am not a visitor here. I am part of what makes this work. Thursday evening she went to the library. He was there. She had started expecting this. She was no longer surprised by it the way she had once been surprised by the kitchen mornings. It was simply what happened. She came to the library on certain evenings and he was there, and they read, and the room held both of them, and they went to bed and in the morning the whole thing started again. She sat in her chair. He looked up. There's a letter for you, he said. On the hall table. From Calder. She was still for a moment. Then she said, I'll deal with it tomorrow. He looked at her. The direct look. You don't have to deal with it tonight, he said. But you should know it's there. She nodded. I know. She opened her book. She read. The fire was steady. The room was warm. She was aware. somewhere at the base of her attention, of the letter on the hall table, but it was a low-level awareness, something to be addressed rather than something to be afraid of. She had done a great deal of things because she was afraid of other things. She was done with that architecture. She read for 2 hours. When she stood to go, he was already looking at her. "I can come with you," he said, "if you want. To the letter." She looked at him. She thought about what that meant. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to know what she thought. "No," she said. "Thank you. I'll read it alone." He nodded. No argument, no performance. She went to the hall table. She picked up the letter. She took it to her room. She sat on the bed and held it for a moment. It was thin. Official letterhead from Calder, from the firm she had left, the one that was connected to Graham Ford in the particular way that firms were connected to their founders, in places where everyone knew everyone, and the knowing was used as leverage. She opened it. It was brief. It was formal. It said, in the language of people who said things without saying them, that a previous matter had been resolved and that there was no ongoing interest in her current whereabouts or situation, and that she could consider the matter closed. She read it twice. She held it. She thought about what it had cost, the last 4 months. The leaving, the bus, the gravel, the cardboard box, the careful building of a new place, the 7 weeks of learning a house and a life and a set of people and one person in particular. She thought about all of it. And then she thought, it's over. She put the letter down on the bedside table next to where the zipper pouch used to be, where it had been that first night, and which she had long ago moved to the drawer because she no longer needed to see it first thing every morning to know it was safe. She thought, it's done. She thought, I am not where I was, I am here. She took the letter to the desk drawer and put it in, not with the unsent letters, in a different section, and she closed the drawer. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark. The house was around her. She thought, tomorrow I will tell him it is resolved. He will say good, we will go on. She thought, that is exactly right. She thought, that is what having someone is, not the dramatic version, not someone who rescues you. Just someone who says I can come with you if you want, and then accepts it when you say no, and is there when you get back. She lay in the dark, and felt the particular quality of that, the weight of it, the specific goodness of it, and she let herself have it, without managing it, or filing it away. She just felt it. She let it be real. The night was quiet, no pacing. Just the house, steady and warm, doing what it always did, which was hold. She slept well. In the morning she went down before 6 and made tea, and he was not there yet, and she stood at the window and watched the garden in the dark and waited, without thinking of it as waiting, because it was not exactly waiting when the thing you were waiting for was simply the next part of something that was already there. He came in at 6:03. She turned. He looked at her, the quiet, direct look. It's resolved, she said. The letter. It was confirmation that the thing from Calder is closed. He was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. Yes, she said. He moved to the counter. He made his coffee. She poured more tea. They stood at the window together for a moment, shoulder close, the garden going from black to gray outside, the first birds. Spring, he said, looking at the garden. The rose bed. When it's time. I'll be here, she said. He turned and looked at her, not briefly, not managing anything, just looked, the way he looked when he had decided not to do the careful version. I know, he said. She thought, this is the whole thing. Not a declaration, not a ceremony, just the accumulated fact of two people who had been honest with each other enough times that the honesty had become a structure they were both inside. She thought, I am inside something that is not a cage. I am inside something I chose. She picked up her mug. She went to work. The day began around her, Owen at his gate, Wren at her schedule, Pip cheerful about something she did not catch, Mr. Aldred moving through the house with his particular settled efficiency. She moved through her morning with the easy competence she had built here, and the rooms were the rooms she knew, and the work was the work she was good at, and outside the November garden was gray and bare and had the good bones of something that would be something else come spring. She thought about spring. She thought about being here for it. She would be. She was not going anywhere. She moved through the house and the house moved around her, and it was a Tuesday in the 8th week, and it was ordinary, in every way that mattered, and extraordinary in the way that things were extraordinary when you had built them from scratch and they were yours and you knew it. She cleaned the east wing bathroom. She checked the latch on the linen closet. She made a note about the airing cupboard shelf, which was still holding but which she was watching. She went down to the kitchen for lunch and ate with Owen and Pip and Wren, and said things and listened to things and was present. She was present. That was the whole of it. She was present, and the house was around her, and the day went on, and the evening would come, and tomorrow would come, and she would be here for all of it. She was going to be here for all of it. She sat in the kitchen at the long staff table and drank her tea, and looked out the window at the November garden and thought about nothing and everything and the specific good weight of a life that had become hers. She thought, here. She thought, yes. She thought, this. She drank her tea. She went back to work. Outside the garden waited for spring. Inside the house held everything it always had, steadily, without drama, stone and wood and light and all the people in it doing their particular work. She was one of them. She was part of the holding. She was home.